The iron key was cold enough to hurt her hand. Lady Claudine Greevely discovered this before she discovered what it meant to be a duchess, before she discovered whether marriage could be lonelier than spinsterhood, and before she learned that a man might give a woman's a castle with the same expression another man used to dismiss a servant. London had never seemed so full of candles as it did that evening, and never so pitiless. Selborne House stood in Mayfair with all its windows lit, its marble hall polished to a mirror shine, its staircase garlanded with late autumn greenery, as though the wedding breakfast had been a triumph rather than a transaction conducted beneath chandeliers and careful smiles. Beyond the doors of the drawing-room, carriages rattled through the damp streets, carrying away guests who had eaten the Duke of Highclere's food, admired the bride's composure, and whispered over their gloves that his Grace had not once looked like a bridegroom. Claudine stood near the long pier-glass because no one had offered her a chair. She had been married for less than 6 hours. Her white satin gown still held the faint scent of chapel beeswax and crushed orange blossom. A pearl pin at her bodice had begun to pull at the lace, but she did not adjust it. Too many eyes waited for any little sign that she understood her humiliation. Across the room, Elwyn Selborne, Duke of Highclere, spoke with his solicitor in a voice too low for her to hear. He was tall, spare, and impeccably dressed in black, a man built out of restraint and old sorrow. Nothing in his posture betrayed haste. Nothing betrayed tenderness. He might have been concluding a land purchase. Beside the hearth, Lady Morwenna Leake lowered her lashes and smiled into her teacup. She had not been invited as family. She had come because society always made room for beautiful women who knew where wounds would open. "Northumberland in November," she murmured, just loudly enough for the nearest matrons to hear. "How brave of her Grace. Some brides are taken to the opera. Others are sent where there are thick walls and very few visitors." A soft ripple passed through the room. Claudine felt it as one feels a draught beneath a closed door. She did not look toward Lady Morwenna. She had learned years ago that dignity was sometimes no more than choosing where not to turn one's head. Her father, Lord Greevely, had accepted the marriage with gratitude he had tried to disguise as prudence. House Greevely was old enough to be invited and poor enough to be pitied. Claudine had entered the arrangement with clear eyes. The Duke required a wife of respectable birth, modest demands, and no dangerous ambitions. Her family required rescue from decline that had been polite for so long it had become invisible. No one had spoken of love. No one had been foolish enough. Still, there were degrees of coldness. She had not expected warmth. She had expected civility. The solicitor closed his portfolio. The sound of leather clasps meeting was small, but the room seemed to notice. Elwyn turned. For the first time since the chapel, his attention rested fully upon her. His eyes were grey, not pale, not soft, but steady enough to make retreat feel childish. Claudine lifted her chin. She would not cross the room like a summoned dependent. After a moment, he came to her. Conversations thinned around them. "Your Grace," he said. The title struck her almost before the voice did. It should have belonged to an older woman with diamonds and command, not to a bride whose gloves were mended at the inner seam. "Your Grace," she returned. His mouth changed by the smallest degree, not amusement and not quite pain. He held out a narrow ring of iron from which hung a single key tied with a faded blue ribbon. The ribbon looked absurdly gentle against his black glove. "This is for Briarholt Castle." Claudine looked at the key before she took it. Briarholt. In Northumberland. I know where it is. Then you know it is remote. Most things worth neglecting are placed at a distance, I believe. Several people nearby stopped pretending not to listen. The Duke's gaze did not waver. Briarholt is part of the Highclere estates. It has been closed in all but function for some years. You will have full domestic authority there. She took the key. The iron shocked her palm with cold. Her fingers tightened despite herself. Elwyn saw it. She knew he saw it because his eyes dropped, quickly and sharply, to her hand. He noticed the thinness of her glove. He noticed, too, the tremor she killed before it could become visible. For one strange breath, Claudine thought he might cover her hand with his own and warm the key between them. His gloved fingers moved, almost imperceptibly. Then they stopped. He withdrew before offering anything that might be mistaken for comfort. "The carriage leaves at first light," he said. That was when the room truly went silent. Not entirely. A teacup touched a saucer. Silk shifted. Somewhere near the hearth, Lady Morwenna inhaled as though savouring a perfume. Claudine looked from the key to her husband. "The carriage," she repeated. "Your trunks have been sent ahead. How efficient. The roads are worsening. I would not advise delay." No, delay might give the appearance of reluctance. "Would it be reluctance?" he asked, quietly. So quietly that only she could have heard the edge beneath it. Claudine's fingers ached around the key. She wanted, with an intensity that surprised her, to say something cruel enough to make him feel the shape of what he had handed her. Instead, she glanced toward the room, toward the curious faces, toward her father's anxious eyes, toward Morwenna's pleased mouth. Then she looked back at the Duke. "It would be untidy, Your Grace, and I gather you dislike untidy things." His jaw tightened. There, not victory exactly, proof that he was not stone. He stepped a little closer, still well within propriety, yet near enough that she caught the faint scent of rain on wool and sandalwood soap. "Mrs. Marden is the housekeeper at Briarholt. She has been informed that you are to be obeyed in all domestic matters. The steward will send accounts when required. No one has authority to deny you access to any room necessary for household management." The words were protection-shaped like instructions. Claudine heard the care in them only because she was listening for the lack of it. "And you?" she asked. His face closed. "I have business in London." "Of course. You will be safe." It was a poor word. Safe. A woman could be safe and unwanted, safe and forgotten, safe behind thick walls with no one coming after her. "That is a generous wedding gift," she said. The silence around them sharpened. Elwyn's hand lowered to his side. For a heartbeat, he looked older than 36, as if every candle in the room had gone out somewhere behind his eyes. "Briarholt is not generous," he said. "It is yours to govern, but not yours to visit. Not at present." Lady Morwenna's voice floated from the hearth, sweet as sugared poison. One must admire his Grace's confidence. A lesser man might keep a new Duchess in town to present her properly, but perhaps her Grace prefers country air to scrutiny. Claudine turned then. Slowly, she let the room see her do it. Lady Morwenna's beauty was all polish, all pale gold hair and rose-colored silk, the kind of beauty that entered a room already certain of forgiveness. Claudine gave her a small, calm smile. "I have always preferred air to smoke, Lady Morwenna. One sees farther in the country." A faint sound moved through the guests. Not laughter exactly, but surprise wearing gloves. Morwenna's smile thinned. Elwyn looked at Claudine as if he had not expected resistance to come so quietly. That look unsettled her more than his coldness had. She did not want to be noticed only because she had bled with grace. The Dowager Duchess's portrait hung above the mantel, painted in blue satin, one hand resting over a ribbon at her waist. Claudine's gaze caught on it for the briefest moment. The ribbon in the painting was blue, faded now by varnish and years, but unmistakably blue. She looked down at the key, the same shade perhaps, or memory made that connection because pain liked patterns. Was this hers? Claudine asked before she could prevent herself. Elwyn followed her glance to the portrait. Every line of him went still. The key belongs to Briarholt. That was not what I asked. No, he said, it was not. He offered nothing more. The refusal was so complete that it became a door in itself. Claudine understood then that Briarholt was not merely an estate. It was a locked room inside her husband, and he had sent her there because he could not bear to enter it. Perhaps that should have comforted her. It did not. Being made custodian of another person's grief was not the same as being cherished. Lord Greevely approached with a face arranged into gratitude. A fine trust, Claudine. A very fine trust from his grace. His relief was so naked that she forgave him and resented him in the same breath. Yes, Papa, she said, a fine trust. The Duke's eyes flickered at the softness in her voice. He had heard what she had hidden for her father's sake. That too he noticed. He seemed to notice everything except the simple cruelty of leaving. The final guests began to depart. Compliments were offered, curtsies were made. Claudine stood beside her husband and received them as Duchess of Highclere, while the key pressed its shape into her palm. Lady Morwenna was last among the lingering guests. She dipped a graceful curtsy, first to Elwyn, then to Claudine, though the second was shallow enough to be insult, dressed as etiquette. I hope Briarholt proves comfortable, Your Grace. If it is not, Claudine said, I shall begin there. Morwenna's eyes sharpened. Elwyn said nothing, but when Claudine turned away, she felt his attention follow her. Not warmth, not yet. Something more dangerous than indifference. When the hall emptied and servants came softly to remove cups and plates, Elwyn walked with her to the foot of the staircase. It was the most private they had been all day, though 2 footmen stood within sight and her maid waited above. Propriety was a fence neither of them crossed. The north is cold, he said. You will need heavier gloves. I shall ask Mrs. Marden. Ask no one. Order what you require. Is that what a duchess does? Yes. And if what I require is my husband's presence. The words had escaped before pride could catch them. She hated herself for them at once. Not because they were weak, but because they were true enough to wound. Elwyn looked at her for a long time. His expression did not soften, but something in it grew less defended and more tired. Then I would tell you that you deserve better company than a man who has forgotten how to live in his own house. It was not affection. It was not apology. It was the first honest thing he had given her. Claudine's anger faltered, which made it worse. Is Briarholt so terrible? She asked. No. His gaze moved past her to some distance no one else could see. That is why I do not go there. Before she could answer, he bowed, not deeply, not coldly, correctly, and with a restraint that felt almost like pain. Good night, Duchess. Good night, Your Grace. He turned away first. She watched him cross the hall and disappear into the library, where a fire had been laid for him. For her, there would be a carriage at dawn. Claudine climbed the staircase with the key hidden inside her fist. Only when she reached the landing did she open her hand. The iron had left a red mark across her palm. The blue ribbon lay limp against her glove, soft and faded, as though it had once been tied by someone, who believed keys opened homes instead of ending hopes. She did not cry, not in the corridor, not while her maid unpinned the orange blossoms from her hair, not while the great house settled into silence beneath her new name. At first light, under a sky the color of pewter, the carriage waited before Selborne House. Elwyn did not come down to see her off. A footman handed her a lap rug, a travelling case, and a sealed note bearing the ducal crest. Inside, in Elwyn's severe hand, were only practical instructions. Coal was to be supplied as needed. Repairs were to be approved at her discretion. No servant was to question her authority. At the bottom, a final line had been added with more pressure than the rest. You are not to be made uncomfortable for economy's sake. Claudine read it twice. Then she folded it and placed it beside the key. As the carriage pulled away from Mayfair, she did not look back at the house where her husband remained. London blurred into wet stone, then road, then open country. Each mile carried her farther from the life she had been expected to want, and closer to the castles he had given her, like a locked confession. By the time Briarholt rose before her, days later, dark against the Northumberland sky, dusk had gathered along its battlements. No welcoming lamps burned in the windows. No smoke lifted from the chimneys. The great doors opened slowly, and cold air breathed out as if the house itself had been holding its grief for years. Claudine stepped down from the carriage with the iron key in her hand. Behind her, the wheels had carved deep tracks into the mud. Before her waited stone, silence, and a hall without fire. She lifted her chin, closed her aching fingers around the key, and walked in. The first sound Briarholt Castle gave its new Duchess was not a welcome. It was the dull scrape of a bolt dragged back by a hand too tired to hurry. Claudine stood beneath the black arch of the entrance, while the last grey of evening gathered behind her carriage, and watched the door open upon darkness. No line of servants waited in ceremonial order. No fire burned in the grate at the far end of the hall. No chandelier had been lit. A single candle trembled in the hand of an older woman in a plain black gown, its small flame revealing stone flags, sheeted furniture, and a staircase that rose into shadow, as though it had no intention of returning anyone who climbed it. "Your Grace," the woman said, and sank into a curtsy that was correct despite the cold. "Mrs. Kezia Marden, housekeeper." Claudine stepped across the threshold with the iron key in her gloved hand, and felt the chill of the house pass through satin, wool, and bone. "Mrs. Marden." Her voice sounded calm. She was grateful for that. "I appear to have arrived before the fires." The housekeeper's eyes flickered, first toward the empty hearth, then toward the footman struggling with trunks behind Claudine. It was not fear exactly. It was the careful look of someone who had survived by saying less than she knew. "The fires were laid where coal remained, Your Grace." "And where does coal remain?" Mrs. Marden's mouth tightened. "In the servants' hall. A little in the kitchen. None in the state rooms. None fit for the family apartments unless we break into the winter store." "Break into it?" "Sir Yardley Mompesson keeps the store key with the estate office keys. His last instruction said economy was to be observed until further allowance." Claudine looked down at the iron key in her hand. The blue ribbon moved faintly in the draught from the open door. Elwyn had written that no servant was to question her authority. He had written that she was not to be made uncomfortable for economy's sake. That line returned to her now with its severe pressure. And for the first time since London, she wondered whether the note had been more than courtesy. "Then we shall begin by discovering what my key opens," she said. Mrs. Marden's eyes lifted fully to hers. Something cautious and alive moved there. Yes, Your Grace. The tour of Briarholt did not feel like a tour. It felt like an inventory of absences. In the great hall, portraits watched from walls filmed with dust. In the drawing room, holland covers lay over chairs as if the room had been put to sleep and never awakened. The morning room smelled faintly of cold ashes, though Mrs. Marden said no fire had been lit there in months. A corridor to the east wing had been roped off, not with ceremony, but with faded cord and resignation. The key opened the linen press. Though there were fewer blankets than any house of this size should have possessed, it opened the silver closet, where a careful list hung on a nail beside empty spaces that had not been properly explained. It opened the old schoolroom. Claudine paused there, candle raised. Low shelves stood against the wall. A slate lay cracked on a small table. Dust silvered the window seat. There were children here once? Tenant children in winter. Long ago, Mrs. Marden said. Her late grace approved it. Afterward, the room was closed. Afterward, Claudine repeated. The housekeeper did not answer. At the end of the upper corridor, the key did not open a narrow blue-painted door. It fitted, but would not turn. The ribbon tied to Claudine's key brushed the lock as she tried again. In the candlelight, she saw that the nursery curtains visible through a tear in the cloth were faded blue, the same tired shade. Not proof, only a small, uncomfortable echo. This room is locked separately. Yes, Your Grace. By whom? Mrs. Marden's silence lasted a little too long. The old nursery wing has not been used since the late Duchess's time. That was not what I asked. The words came before Claudine meant them to. They sounded too much like her own question to Elwyn in London. For a moment, she saw his face again. That stillness when she had asked whether the key had belonged to the woman in the portrait. The memory struck warmer than it should have, not because it was tender, but because he had not lied. He had refused her answer, but he had not lied. Mrs. Marden lowered her candle. I believe, sir, Yardley ordered the separate lock maintained. Sir Yardley appears to order a great many things in a house that has a duke. His Grace has been absent from Briarholt for many years. Claudine closed her fingers around the iron key until it pressed against the tender red mark still lingering on her palm from the journey. His Grace has a Duchess now. The housekeeper looked at her as if a shutter somewhere inside had opened by an inch. Yes, Your Grace. They did not go at once to the family apartments. Claudine asked to see the kitchens. It was not what Mrs. Marden expected. It was not what the tired footman expected. But if a house had no warmth, the kitchen would know why before the drawing-room admitted it. Below stairs, the air changed from aristocratic cold to working cold. Two kitchen maids stood near a range that had been coaxed into life with insufficient fuel. A thin soup steamed in an iron pot, more scent than substance. A young scullery maid dropped a curtsy so quickly that she nearly struck her shoulder against the table. Claudine saw chapped hands, patched cuffs, a basket of turnips, and a row of faces prepared for disappointment. How many are in the household at present? She asked. 9 indoors, Your Grace, Mrs. Marden said. 3 outdoor men kept regular, others called when required. For a castle? For what remains open? Claudine took that in. Then she removed one glove. The kitchen seemed to stop breathing. A duchess did not usually stand bare-handed below stairs on the evening of her arrival. She did not usually touch the edge of a work-table and look into a soup pot. But Claudine had been sent to a castle without fire. She had no audience left in London to please. Mrs. Marden, who has not been paid, The housekeeper's composure broke by a fraction. Your Grace? You heard me. A maid looked down. One of the footmen at the door shifted. Mrs. Marden's hand tightened on her candle. There have been delays. How long? For some, 8 weeks. For others, 12. A small silence followed. It was more terrible than complaint. Claudine thought of Selborne House, of trays of uneaten wedding cakes, of candles burning in every room for guests, eager to witness whether she would be cherished or put away. Then she looked at the soup again. Bring me the wage list. Sir Yardley keeps the formal book in the estate office. Then bring me the informal list. Mrs. Marden stared at her. Claudine met the look steadily. A housekeeper who has kept this place breathing on insufficient coal and unpaid loyalty will have made one. For the first time, Mrs. Marden's expression changed in a way that was almost not guarded. Yes, Your Grace, I have. The list was kept behind a loose panel in the still-room, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, not hidden from guilt, hidden from those who made honesty dangerous. Claudine read each name by candlelight. Mary Bell, kitchen maid, 12 weeks. Thomas Rook, footman, 8 weeks. Nell Price, scullery, 10 weeks. Mrs. Marden's own wage had been marked last, then crossed through. Claudine looked up. You crossed out your own name. There was not enough, Your Grace. There is enough for a duke's name above the door. No one spoke. Claudine reached for her travelling reticule and took out the small purse her father had pressed upon her in London with embarrassed affection. Pin money. Not much by ducal standards, more than enough to say the first true thing Briarholt had heard from her. These wages will be paid tonight as an advance from my personal allowance. Tomorrow we will open the estate office and discover why wages were delayed in the first place. Mrs. Marden's face went pale. Sir Yardley will object. He may write his objections on very expensive paper. A startled breath passed through the kitchen. Almost laughter, but not quite. Claudine allowed herself no smile yet. Tonight, the servants' hall fire will be built up. Food will be served hot, not elegant, hot. Any elderly tenant or dependent who has been promised kitchen portions may receive them. If there is not enough meat, stretch broth with barley. If there is not enough bread, bake more before morning. If there is not enough coal in the open bins, we will use what remains where we may lawfully reach it, and tomorrow I will require the store opened. Mrs. Marden's eyes shone, though her voice stayed firm. Yes, Your Grace, the little scullery maid whispered. Thank you, ma'am, then went scarlet at her own boldness. Claudine looked at her. What is your name? Nell, Your Grace. Then thank me tomorrow, Nell, if breakfast is better than supper. This time the breath in the room became a small, real sound of life. Not joy, not yet. Relief, perhaps. Claudine pulled her glove back on and felt the iron key waiting in her other hand. Its cold had changed. No, that was not true. The key was still cold. Her hand had simply grown warmer from use. Later, when the servants' hall fire had been stirred into a blaze, and the first proper steam rose from the kitchen, Claudine stood alone for a moment in the entrance hall. A single lamp now burned on the table beneath the portraits. It did not conquer the darkness. It merely refused to surrender to it. Mrs. Marden approached with a sealed paper. Your Grace, this was left in the estate office tray. Sir Yardley's hand. Claudine broke the seal. The message was brief, neat, and bloodless. Economy remains necessary. Her Grace is advised not to alter household accounts or stores without consultation. Unregulated charity produces disorder. Why Mompesson? Claudine read it twice. Then she folded it carefully. Mrs. Marden, Your Grace, tomorrow I shall require the estate office opened. The office key is not on that ring." Claudine looked toward the dark corridor where the locked nursery waited above, then down at the blue ribbon on the iron key Elwyn had given her. A punishment, a protection, a confession. She did not yet know which. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we shall find out why everyone at Briarholt is so afraid of locked doors." Outside, the wind pressed against the old stones. Inside, for the first time in years, the servants' hall fire burned high enough to throw warmth beneath the door. By the third morning, Briarholt had begun to resist silence. It did not surrender all at once. Ancient houses never did. They yielded by degrees, like proud invalids offended by recovery. A fire had been coaxed into the kitchen range before dawn. 2 lamps burned in the passage to the servants' hall. The great staircase had been swept, though the upper rail still left dust on a glove. In the chapel, 3 benches had been uncovered and rubbed clean, and Mrs. Marden had placed a single brass candlestick upon the small table near the door, as if the house might remember prayer if someone first remembered light. Claudine stood in the old schoolroom with her sleeves pinned back beneath a plain morning gown of grey wool, reading the unpaid wage list against the first pale light from the windows. The room smelled of dust, chalk, and cold wood. Below, Nell Price was laughing at something Thomas Rooke had said, then stopping quickly as though laughter might still be taxed. Claudine heard the restraint in it. That was what neglect did. It trained people to distrust warmth even after it arrived. "The baker from Allenby village sent word," Marden said from the doorway. "He will extend credit for a week if the order bears your Grace's hand." A week is not credit, it is mercy made anxious. Claudine dipped her pen and signed the order. "He shall have payment on delivery. I will not have a tradesman kept waiting merely because a castle can frighten him." Mrs. Marden accepted the paper with an expression that had grown less guarded each hour and more troubled by what she was beginning to hope. "That will be spoken of in the village. Good. Let them speak. Of bread rather than ghosts." "They speak of both here, Your Grace." Claudine looked toward the blue-painted nursery door at the far end of the corridor, still locked, still refusing the iron key on its faded ribbon. "Then we shall begin with bread. Ghosts may wait one more day." She returned to the table where the estate household ledger lay open beside her smaller notes. The formal book had not yet been surrendered. Sir Yardley Mompesson had sent a second letter instead, even colder than the first, regretting that the estate office could not be opened without his presence, since his Grace had always preferred proper channels. Claudine had read that phrase aloud once. Proper channels. Mrs. Marden's face had not changed, but the kitchen maid, Mary Bell, had set down a bowl with a little too much force. Now Claudine worked with what the house gave her: linen numbers, coal bins, kitchen purchases, servants' memories. Every small truth had weight if one was patient enough to count it. By noon, she had reopened the chapel for the household, not with ceremony, but by removing sheets, airing cushions, and sending Thomas to fetch the village carpenter to repair a warped outer door. By 2 o'clock, the old schoolroom had a fire, 6 slates washed clean, and 3 tenant children seated near the hearth with bread, broth, and eyes too solemn for childhood. Claudine did not call it charity. She called it winter provision, and wrote the expense under household relief, because pity could be refused, but duty had the dignity of structure. "Your Grace, Mrs." Marden said quietly when the youngest child fell asleep against the bench, one hand curled around a piece of bread. "The late Duchess did something like this. Claudine's hand stilled. With tenant children and widows, and 2 old men who had no daughters near enough to nurse them. Was it disapproved? Mrs. Marden glanced toward the corridor, though no one stood there. Everything gentle was disapproved after a time. Before Claudine could ask by whom, wheels sounded on the gravel outside. Not the heavy rhythm of a supply cart, not the uncertain approach of a tenant. A carriage with good springs, driven fast and stopped with authority. Mrs. Marden's mouth closed. "Sir Yardley," she said. Claudine lowered the ledger cover with care. "Then at last we may open the estate office." Sir Yardley Mompesson entered Briarholt as though the door had offended him by admitting anyone else first. He was a compact man of 48, with silver at his temples, a smooth chin, and the polished severity of those who liked rules best when rules bent toward themselves. His coat was dark brown, practical enough for country roads, yet cut expensively. His boots carried no mud. A groom had clearly done the dirty work before he crossed the threshold. He bowed to Claudine in the great hall, correct by measure and insolent by temperature. "Your Grace, I regret being unable to attend sooner. Had I been informed that you intended extensive alterations within hours of arrival, I would have made every effort. You were informed that I had arrived to find no fires in the family rooms and unpaid servants below stairs. Temporary delays. Estates of this age require discipline. So do men who use the word discipline when they mean neglect." Mrs. Marden, standing behind Claudine, went still. Sir Yardley's eyes flicked toward the housekeeper, then back. "I appreciate your Grace's concern. Newly married ladies often have tender impulses. Briarholt, however, is not a cottage to be warmed by sentiment. No, it is a ducal estate to be managed by accounts. I have asked for them, and I have come to assist in interpreting them. I did not ask for interpretation. I asked for access." His smile remained. "The distinction is less simple than it appears." Claudine looked at him, then turned toward the kitchen passage. "Mrs. Marden, please send Thomas for the estate office key." Sir Yardley raised one hand. "That will not be necessary. I keep the keys myself." "How convenient. For security." "For whom?" The question landed softly. That made it more dangerous. Sir Yardley's smile thinned by the smallest degree. "His Grace has long trusted me to prevent disorder." Claudine drew the iron key from the pocket at her waist. The faded blue ribbon brushed her grey gown. "His Grace gave me full domestic authority over Briarholt. He also wrote that no one is to deny me access to any room necessary for household management. Unless the estate office contains no household accounts, I believe it is necessary. That key will not open the office. Then yours will." The hall held its breath. From the corridor beyond, a small child coughed in the schoolroom. Sir Yardley heard it. His eyes sharpened. "You have opened the schoolroom?" "Yes, for village children, for hungry children attached to this estate. Your Grace, I must advise caution. Such generosity, once begun, becomes impossible to regulate. The poor mistake kindness for entitlement." Claudine stepped closer, not enough to threaten propriety, but enough to make retreat visible if he took it. "Why are the poor always asked to economize first?" The words moved through the hall like a dropped glass that did not break until everyone had heard it fall. Thomas Rooke stood near the green baize door with his eyes lowered. Mary Bell had appeared behind him. Mrs. Marden did not move at all, but something in her face changed. Sir Yardley's colour rose. "That is not a practical question." "It is the first practical question I have heard since I arrived." "Your Grace is inexperienced." "Then instruct me with numbers." She held out her hand. The office key, Sir Yardley. He did not give it at once. His hesitation was brief, but Claudine saw it. She had spent half her life in drawing rooms where women were not expected to notice business, which had taught her to notice everything else. The pause, the narrowed eye, the calculation of witnesses. Finally, he removed a ring from his coat and detached one key. "For today," he said, "until His Grace clarifies the extent of your involvement. His Grace may clarify anything he likes. Today this house will eat." The estate office smelled of old ink, leather, and damp paper. It stood on the western side of the house, near the steward's entrance, and had been kept warmer than the family rooms. That alone told Claudine something. Sir Yardley unlocked a cabinet and selected 2 ledgers with the air of a man offering harmless toys to a child. Claudine let him. She took the first book to the desk, opened her own notes beside it, and began comparing columns. Coal ordered, coal received, wages authorized, wages delayed, linen listed, linen absent, grain purchased, grain never delivered to the kitchen. Sir Yardley talked while she worked. He explained drainage, tenant arrears, repairs to the northern boundary wall, the danger of emotional precedents. Claudine answered only when numbers required speech. Silence unsettled him more than argument. At last, she found the first inconsistency. 4 tons of coal delivered on the 7th of October. "Yes," he said, "for the south wing." The south wing had no coal. Perhaps Mrs. Marden did not inspect the correct store. Mrs. Marden stood by the door. "I inspected every bin, sir." He did not look at her. Servants misremember. Claudine turned a page. Barley and mutton delivered twice in 1 week. For household use. The kitchen received turnips and old bones. "Your Grace cannot expect me to answer for every cook's complaint." "No, I expect you to answer for every receipt." That quieted him. Not long enough to be victory, but long enough to prove fear had entered the room. As she turned the ledger toward the light, a folded slip slid from between 2 pages and fell beneath the desk. Claudine bent to retrieve it. It was not a receipt. It was a narrow note in a severe, familiar hand. "For necessary winter comforts, do not reduce below this sum." E.S. The ink was older than her marriage by several months. Elwyn's writing, Elwyn's pressure on the page. Claudine touched the indented letters with her bare fingertip before she remembered Sir Yardley was watching. An absurd intimacy passed through her, distant and indirect, as if her hand had brushed the trace of her husband's will in a room he refused to enter. He had ordered comfort. Someone had withheld it. She closed her fingers around the note. Where did this instruction go after His Grace wrote it? Sir Yardley's eyes rested on the paper. For the first time, his face lost polish. Into the account, naturally. Not into the coal bin, not into the wage envelopes, not into the kitchen. Your Grace should take care before implying misconduct. I imply nothing. I count. She placed Elwyn's note beside the ledger, and the numbers have begun to speak. A knock sounded before Sir Yardley could answer. Thomas entered with a folded message, breathless from haste. "From the London Courier, Your Grace." Delivered at the outer gate. Claudine took it. The paper bore no crest, only a line in a hand she did not know. Her Grace is altering everything. She read it once. Then again, the message was not addressed to her. It had been copied, perhaps carelessly, perhaps deliberately. Sir Yardley reached for it. Claudine moved it out of his reach. "How interesting," she said. "Briarholt has been cold for years, yet warmth travels to London in 3 days." Sir Yardley's eyes hardened. Outside the office window, the afternoon light thinned over the Northumberland fields. Inside, Claudine placed the iron key, Elwyn's note, and her own wage list in a straight line upon the desk. 3 small things. Not enough yet to condemn anyone, enough to prove she was not imagining the shape of the locked door before her. That evening, in London, someone would learn that the Duchess had begun opening rooms. And at Briarholt, Sir Yardley Mompesson learned that the woman he had expected to manage like furniture could read a ledger, remember a silence, and ask the one question no one in the house had dared to ask aloud. Elwyn Selborne saw the first light in Briarholt's windows before he saw the castle itself, and for one moment he believed he had come to the wrong place. He had left London under a low morning sky, with the intention of spending one night in Northumberland, inspecting the estate quietly, and returning before anyone could turn his visit into sentiment. He told himself it was prudence. Sir Yardley's letters had grown increasingly sharp. Lady Morwenna's note had been sharper still, folded into lavender paper and delivered to Selborne House with the kind of concern that always smelled faintly of triumph. Her Grace, she had written, appears determined to remake Briarholt into a refuge for every idle dependent who can flatter her. I fear she mistakes disorder for benevolence. Elwyn had read the line twice, then placed it in the fire without watching it burn. Yet, by dusk on the 11th day after Claudine's departure, he was riding through the northern gates with only his valet and a groom behind him, the November wind dragging at his coat and the old road rising beneath his horse like a memory he had never forgiven. He had expected darkness. Briarholt had always been dark in his mind, even at noon, even in summer, even before grief had taken root in every stone. He remembered the house as cold corridors, closed doors, his father's voice measuring economies, his mother's shawl drawn thinly across her shoulders while she smiled and said she was perfectly well. Now candlelight glowed behind the long windows of the servants' hall. Smoke lifted steadily from 3 chimneys. Not 1, 3. At the side entrance, a boy in an oversized coat carried a basket of split wood, while a kitchen maid followed with a covered jug and laughed when the wind tried to snatch her cap. Laughed. Elwyn reined in beneath the shadow of a leafless beech and stared. Through the uncovered lower windows he saw movement, not frantic, not wasteful, but ordered and warm. A maid crossed with a stack of folded linen. Thomas Rooke, whom Elwyn remembered as a solemn footman with hollow cheeks, opened the door to an elderly tenant woman and took her bundle as though she mattered. Beyond them, in the hall where his father had once forbidden fires before December, a line of candles burned along the mantel. Elwyn's gloved hand tightened on the reins until his horse shifted uneasily. "Shall I announce your Grace?" his valet asked. "No." The word came too quickly. Elwyn dismounted. "Take the horses to the stable yard. Say nothing until asked." He entered by the western door, the one servants and estate men used when the main hall was shut for winter. It should have smelled of damp wool and old ash. Instead, it smelled faintly of barley soup, beeswax, and floor soap. Warmth moved under the door from the servants' hall. Not enough to soften stone, enough to accuse memory. Elwyn removed his hat and stood in the narrow passage while voices carried from beyond the green baize door. Mrs. Marden was speaking, crisp and low. A child answered. Then Claudine's voice came, not loud, but clear enough that everyone seemed to arrange themselves around it. "No, Annie, the slate does not care if the number is ugly. It cares if it is true. Numbers are rather like people in that respect." A small giggle followed. Elwyn did not move. He should have. A gentleman did not stand in service passages listening like a thief in his own house. A husband did not watch his wife, unannounced. because he lacked courage to enter by the front door. Yet he remained there, still as a man before judgment, and looked through the narrow opening where the door had not quite closed. Claudine stood in the old schoolroom beyond the passage, though he had to step silently nearer to see her fully. She wore a grey gown, plain and practical, with the sleeves pinned away from her wrists. A smudge of soot marked one cuff. There was another faint mark near her cheek, as if she had brushed at her face with an unclean hand and forgotten to be embarrassed. Her hair, which London had dressed into bridal order, had been gathered simply at the nape. She was not beautiful in the brittle manner London prized. She was something worse for a man determined to remain unmoved. She was alive inside a room he had left dead. 3 tenant children sat near the hearth with slates on their knees. A basket of mended stockings rested beside Claudine's chair. On the table lay household papers, a list of names, and his own old instruction note, the one he had written months before and believed had been obeyed. For necessary winter comforts, do not reduce below this sum. He felt the words return to him like a hand closing around his throat. Claudine bent over the smallest child's slate. There. You see, the answer was waiting after all. Like the fires, Your Grace, the child asked. Claudine went still for the smallest instant, then smiled. Yes, like the fires. Elwyn stepped back before anyone could see his face. It was a mistake. The movement brought his shoulder against a narrow table, and a pewter candlestick struck stone floor with a ringing clatter. Silence fell at once. The door opened. Mrs. Marden appeared first, candle raised. Her eyes widened, then steadied into a curtsy. Your Grace. Claudine came to the doorway behind her. The warmth from the schoolroom moved past her into the corridor. So did the scent of smoke and bread. Elwyn had prepared for surprise, resentment, perhaps cold politeness. He had not prepared for the way she looked at him as if he were both the answer to a question and the cause of it. Your Grace, she said. It was perfectly correct. It hurt more than anger. Duchess. His voice sounded rougher than he intended. Her gaze dropped to the travel mud on his boots, then returned to his face. Briarholt has no formal expectation of visitors this evening. I did not come as a visitor. No, no. He should have said husband. The word stood between them, visible and unused. Mrs. Marden looked from one to the other and made a tactful retreat back into the schoolroom, though not so far that propriety vanished. Elwyn saw Claudine notice the choice and approve it. She had learned the house quickly. Too quickly. A soot mark darkened the fine skin above her wrist where the pinned sleeve had slipped. He saw it and, without thinking, removed his right glove. Her eyes moved to the gesture. He stopped. The air changed. 10 days ago in London, he had nearly covered her cold hand and had withdrawn because comfort was a promise he did not know how to keep. Now his bare fingers hovered uselessly beside a mark made by work he should never have left her to do. Are you hurt? He asked. Claudine looked at the soot, then at him. No, merely useful. The answer struck exactly where she intended it to. He folded the glove in his hand. You should not have had to be. Yet here we are. Behind them, from the lower hall, another voice floated upward, bright and polished and wholly unwelcome. Elwyn, Sir Yardley said you had come, ahead of us, but I could scarcely believe you would enter your own castle like a tradesman. Lady Morwenna Leake appeared at the end of the passage in a travelling cloak of dark blue velvet, Sir Yardley Mompesson at her side. The sight of them together told Elwyn more than either intended. Sir Yardley's eyes moved first to Claudine's sleeve, then to the papers visible in the schoolroom, then to Elwyn's ungloved hand. Lady Morwenna smiled. "Your Grace," she said to Claudine, "how industrious you look. One hears such astonishing things. Children in the schoolroom, tenants at the kitchen door, servants sitting by fires as though Briarholt were an inn." Claudine did not step back. If Briarholt were an inn, Lady Morwenna, I hope it would still be ashamed to leave people cold. The colour in Morwenna's cheeks sharpened. Sir Yardley bowed. "Your Grace," he said to Elwyn, "I had intended to explain matters privately. Her Grace has been moved by generous impulses. Admirable, of course, in a lady, but the old nursery account must remain sealed until the proper papers can be reviewed. Certain rooms and funds were restricted for excellent reasons." Elwyn turned his head. The old nursery account. Sir Yardley's expression barely shifted, but the mistake had been made. Claudine heard it. Mrs. Marden, just inside the room, heard it. Elwyn felt the past stir behind the locked blue door at the end of the corridor. "A minor technical phrase," Sir Yardley said, "not one for hallway discussion. Then choose another room." Sir Yardley's gaze slid toward the nearby sitting-room door, the one adjoining Claudine's temporary workspace. Perhaps Her Grace's private sitting-room would be convenient. Her notes may be there. He moved one step toward it. Elwyn moved first. Not quickly, not violently. He simply placed himself before the door. "No." The word dropped cleanly. Sir Yardley halted. Lady Morwenna's smile became still. "Your Grace," Sir Yardley said, "you will not enter the Duchess's private sitting-room without her permission." Sir Yardley's face flushed. "I meant only to assist." "Then begin by remembering whose house you are in." Claudine's breath caught, almost inaudibly. Elwyn heard it, because every part of him had turned toward her from the moment he saw the candlelight. Lady Morwenna recovered with a light laugh and gestured toward Claudine's cuff. "How touching. His Grace defends even soot now." Elwyn looked at the mark on Claudine's sleeve. He thought of his mother's white hands folded beneath a thin shawl. He thought of unused coal, unpaid wages, children learning numbers by a fire that should never have gone out. Then he looked back at Lady Morwenna. "It is the cleanest thing in this house tonight." The corridor went silent. Morwenna's smile vanished. Claudine lowered her eyes for one brief second, not in submission, but because something had reached her before she was ready to let the room see it. When she looked up again, Elwyn knew he had not repaired what he had done. Not nearly. But the first stone had shifted. "Sir Yardley," he said, without taking his gaze from Claudine, "you will prepare every household account, wage record, coal receipt, and supplier bill from the last 12 months. Sir Yardley's jaw tightened. "Tonight?" "Tonight. I have been absent too long." The admission cost him. It entered the corridor like a draught from an open tomb. Claudine heard that too. "Your Grace," she said softly. And this time the title held something other than frost. He wanted to answer as a husband. He had not yet earned the right, so he bowed, not to the room, not to Lady Morwenna, but to the woman with soot on her sleeve and the old key at her waist, the woman who had made his abandoned house breathe. "Duchess," he said, "if you will permit it, I will see the accounts with you." Claudine studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside, opening not her private room, but the passage toward the estate office. "Then let us begin where the cold began." The first supper in the great hall was Claudine's idea, which meant Sir Yardley Mompesson objected to it before he had even heard the menu. "A household supper," he said, standing in the estate office with both hands behind his back, "has unfortunate implications. Servants and tenants are not guests in a ducal hall. They are dependents. Once distinctions are blurred, Your Grace will find it difficult to restore them. Claudine looked up from the coal receipts spread across the desk. The room had grown warmer since Elwyn's arrival, though not comfortable. Comfort was still too bold a word for Briarholt, but there was fire now in the grate, and a lamp beside the account books, and Elwyn, standing near the window, with his face turned partly toward the grey afternoon, listening to every word. The distinctions are already clear, Claudine said. They are cold, we are not. They are unpaid, we are not. They are hungry when economies are praised. We dine on porcelain and call it management. Sir Yardley's mouth tightened. That is a sentimental framing. No, it is an itemized one. Elwyn's gaze shifted from the window to her. The movement was small, but Claudine felt it as one feels a door open behind one's shoulder. Since the previous night, he had said little except to demand records. He had read until the candles shortened. He had asked for wage books, coal accounts, kitchen inventories, and supplier notes. He had not apologized again for absence. He had not pretended that one order for an audit could warm what neglect had chilled. Yet every time Sir Yardley tried to diminish her, Elwyn's silence sharpened around him like drawn steel. It should not have mattered. Claudine told herself it did not. Still, when she looked down, the letters on the page blurred for a second beneath the memory of him stopping Sir Yardley outside her private room. The supper will not be a rout, she continued. No orchestra, no dancing, no excessive display. Bread, broth, roasted mutton if the kitchen can manage it, ale for the outdoor men, tea for the women who prefer it, and enough candles that no one need eat in shadow. At whose expense? Sir Yardley asked. Mine, until the accounts explain why Briarholt's own funds have gone missing on paper and nowhere else. Your Grace uses dangerous language. Then correct me with honest numbers. Sir Yardley looked toward Elwyn, plainly expecting rank to rescue him from female persistence. Elwyn did not move. Her Grace asked for numbers, he said. You will provide them. The colour rose in Sir Yardley's face. Your Grace, I must warn that local people talk. If they see the Duchess of Highclere feeding tenants in the great hall within a fortnight of her arrival, they will make a spectacle of it. From the doorway, Lady Morwenna Leake's voice drifted in before she did. They already have. She entered in a dark green afternoon gown, her beauty as carefully arranged as a weapon on velvet. I received 2 calls this morning from ladies who had heard Briarholt has become a charity kitchen. One was almost tearful with admiration. The other could not stop laughing. Claudine closed the account book. How industrious of them both. Morwenna smiled. My dear Duchess, you mistake me. I am only concerned. London is forgiving toward eccentricity in widows and old aunts. It is less forgiving in new brides. How fortunate that Northumberland is not London. But dukes are discussed in London wherever their wives choose to distribute soup. Elwyn turned then. Lady Morwenna. His voice contained no anger. It contained less. You are a guest in my house. Of course, Elwyn. Then speak of the Duchess with the respect due to your hostess. The room went still. Morwenna's lashes lowered, but not before Claudine saw the flash of humiliation beneath them. Sir Yardley studied the floor. Claudine stood slowly. The supper will be at 6. Those who object to warmth need not attend. By 6 o'clock, the great hall had remembered enough of splendor to ache. It was not restored. The high beams remained blackened by age. Several shields on the walls hung crooked. The long tables were mismatched, dragged from storage and polished in haste. But the hearth had been lit with a fire large enough to cast gold across the stone floor, and candles stood in rows along the mantel, windowsills, and trestle boards. The kitchen had stretched itself toward abundance: mutton, barley broth, brown bread, baked apples, cheese, and pitchers of ale filled the air with scents. Briarholt had denied itself for years. Servants came first, uncertain in their cleanest aprons and coats. Then came tenants from nearby cottages, 2 elderly widows, a lame shepherd, 3 children from the schoolroom, and the carpenter, who had repaired the chapel door before accepting payment with visible disbelief. They entered the hall as if expecting someone to correct them. Claudine stood near the hearth with Mrs. Marden at her side. She had chosen a dark blue wool gown rather than satin, with only a small brooch at her throat. The iron key hung from a ribbon at her waist, not displayed, not hidden. It was part of the work now. Elwyn appeared at the far door precisely as the first guests hesitated before the tables. He wore black evening dress without ornament. In London, his presence had chilled rooms into obedience. Here the hall warmed around him and made his severity look almost like uncertainty. Claudine saw him pause. His eyes moved over the servants, the tenants, the children, the food, the fire. Then they came to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Morwenna, standing near Sir Yardley beneath a portrait of a long-dead Selborne, murmured, "How very touching. One almost expects a collection plate." Claudine heard. So did several others. A widow near the table lowered her eyes, ashamed of needing what had been freely offered. Before Claudine could answer, Elwyn crossed the hall. He did not go to Morwenna. He came to Claudine. The room watched, because rooms always watched dukes. He stopped at her side and looked down at her hand, bare because she had been helping Mrs. Marden arrange cups. The memory of London returned between them, sharp as winter, the cold key, his almost touch, his withdrawal. This time he did not withdraw into indifference. He held out his hand, palm angled with formal restraint, the gesture proper enough for every witness and intimate enough that Claudine felt it in her breath. "Duchess," he said quietly, "will you permit me to escort you in?" She looked at his hand. It was not command. It was not ownership. He had offered in front of everyone, and yet left her free to refuse. That freedom, more than the gesture, unsteadied her. "You do know," she said softly, "that this is only supper." His mouth altered by the faintest degree. "I am beginning to suspect nothing in this house is only anything." Claudine placed her hand in his. His fingers closed carefully, not tightly. The warmth of his glove steadied her before she had time to resent needing steadiness. A small hush passed through the hall. Mrs. Marden turned away as if to direct a maid, but Claudine saw the corner of her mouth tremble. Elwyn led her to the head of the first table, not to the raised dais where ducal distance might have been expected. He waited until she sat, then took the chair beside her, not above. Beside. The choice was not lost on anyone. Sir Yardley's face hardened. Morwenna's smile became bright and brittle. "Mrs. Marden," Claudine said, "please see that everyone is served." The first minutes were awkward. Spoons sounded too loud. The tenants ate with the anxious care of people afraid to seem greedy. Elwyn said little, but he listened when the carpenter spoke of the chapel door and asked one plain question about the hinges. The man answered, surprised into honesty. Claudine watched her husband learn how to sit among the lives attached to his name. It was not graceful. It was better than graceful. It was difficult. Halfway through the meal, old Mrs. Vale, one of the widows from Allenby village, raised her cup with both thin hands. "To her grace," she said, for remembering fires burn downward as well as up. The hall fell silent, then lifted into a rough, uneven murmur. Her Grace, the Duchess." Claudine's throat tightened. She did not look at Elwyn, because she feared he would see too much. Then she looked anyway. He was watching her, not the toast, not the hall, but her face, as if the sound of loyalty offered freely had struck some place in him that title never reached. Morwenna set down her spoon. "How fortunate," she said, too sweetly, "to be so easily loved when one spends enough." A shadow crossed several faces. Sir Yardley leaned forward. "Lady Morwenna speaks only from prudence. The estate cannot sustain indefinite indulgence." Claudine laid her napkin beside her plate. "The estate has sustained indefinite neglect. We shall try the opposite and compare the accounts." A few startled smiles appeared and vanished. Elwyn turned to Sir Yardley. "Tomorrow morning you will provide the missing coal receipts. Your Grace, those documents require sorting. Then sort them tonight. It may not be possible. Make it so." The old ducal command entered the hall, but this time it did not silence the weak. It cornered the comfortable. Claudine felt the difference, and so did Elwyn. His shoulder was near hers, not touching, near enough that she sensed the breath he drew before speaking again. "For avoidance of doubt," he said, and now his voice carried to the far tables. "Her Grace has my full authority in all domestic relief at Briarholt. Any man who obstructs her will answer to me. Any person who mistakes mercy for disorder has forgotten the purpose of rank." The hall went utterly still. Then Thomas Rooke bowed his head. Mrs. Marden did the same. One by one, others followed. It was not applause. It was not spectacle. It was recognition, and it was heavier than sound. Claudine should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt the dangerous ache of gratitude and resisted it. Protection was not yet trust. A public statement was not a marriage. Still, when Elwyn's hand rested on the table near hers, not touching, not claiming, merely present, she did not move away. Later, as the hall emptied and warmth lingered in the stones, Mrs. Marden brought a folded receipt from the estate office, her face pale. "Your Grace, this was found behind the second ledger." Claudine opened it beside the last burning candle. The supplier's name was smudged, the amount large, the date impossible. At the bottom, in an imitation of her own newly practiced hand, stood an approval she had never written. Elwyn leaned close enough to see. Claudine felt him go still. Across the hall, Sir Yardley watched from the shadow near the door. The first fire had been lit. Now someone had decided to make warmth look like theft. The forged receipt lay between them on the great hall table while the last candle burned low enough to make the ink look wet. Claudine did not touch it again. She had touched it once when Mrs. Marden placed it in her hand, had felt the cheap paper flecks beneath her fingers, had seen the name of a supplier she did not remember authorizing, and the shape of her own newly practiced signature twisted into obedience by another hand. Now she stood very still, because stillness was the only answer she trusted in a room where someone had tried to make her kindness criminal. Elwyn stood beside her, close enough that the dark sleeve of his coat nearly brushed her gown, not close enough to shield her from the sight. That mattered. She needed to see the lie entire. "You did not sign this," he said. It was not a question. Relief moved through her so quickly that she resented it. "No. Have you used your seal outside this room?" The relief stopped. Claudine turned her head and looked at him. The hall had emptied except for Mrs. Marden near the hearth, Thomas Rooke by the door, Sir Yardley in the shadow beneath the musicians' gallery, and Lady Morwenna pretending not to watch with a glass of untouched wine in her hand. It was not enough privacy for a wound. It was more than enough audience for suspicion. "Is that your first thought?" Claudine asked. Elwyn's face changed by almost nothing, but something behind his eyes tightened. My first thought is that someone means to harm you. My second is that I need to know how they might have reached your papers. Then ask that. I did. No. You asked whether I had been careless. Mrs. Marden lowered her eyes. Sir Yardley's silence became attentive. Elwyn saw that too, and his mouth hardened. Sir Yardley, Lady Morwenna, you will leave us. Morwenna gave a soft laugh. Surely there is no need to banish concern. If her grace is innocent, daylight can only help her. Claudine felt the insult before the words finished. Innocent, as if the burden had shifted quietly from the forged paper to her own person. Elwyn turned toward Morwenna with a look so cold the glass in her hand seemed suddenly fragile. Daylight will come. It will not come through your mouth. The colour left Morwenna's cheeks. Sir Yardley bowed, too smooth to be humble. As your grace wishes. I only urge haste. Rumour moves faster when doors close. Then do not stand in the corridor listening at them, Elwyn said. Sir Yardley's eyes flickered. He bowed again and withdrew with Lady Morwenna, their footsteps fading toward the guest wing. Thomas left at a nod from Mrs. Marden. The housekeeper remained until Claudine said quietly, Please stay, Mrs. Marden. I may need memory more than privacy. Elwyn accepted that without protest. It softened nothing, but it prevented one more harm. He picked up the forged receipt by its cleanest corner and carried it to the morning room, where a fresh lamp had been lit and the account books had been stacked in order. Claudine followed, the iron key at her waist pressing with each step, as though reminding her that authority and accusation were often tied to the same ring. Once inside, Elwyn locked the door only after looking at her. For the document, he said, not against you. She heard the care in the distinction. She was too raw to thank him for it. The morning room had become her war table without asking permission of history. Wage lists, coal records, kitchen orders, Elwyn's old instruction note, and Sir Yardley's letters lay in disciplined piles. The forged receipt did not belong among them. Its paper was thinner. Its ink had browned at the edges too quickly for its supposed date. Claudine leaned over it, then drew one of her true orders beside it. The hand is close, she said, too close for a stranger. Someone has seen enough of your writing to copy it. Everyone in this room knows that. Elwyn looked at her sharply. I said someone, and I heard everyone. The words hung there. Mrs. Marden stood near the door with her hands folded, her face pale but steady. Elwyn drew a breath, checked it, and spoke more quietly. I am not accusing you. I know what accusation sounds like, Your Grace. My family had very little money and a great deal of good breeding. People learned to suggest without saying. It lets them deny cruelty afterward. His gaze lowered for a moment, not in evasion, but in receipt of the blow. Then I will be plain. I believe this is false. I believe it was placed where we would find it after the supper. I believe the timing was deliberate. And yet you asked about my seal, because if I do not ask, the man who made this will ask in public. Claudine looked away. That was the trouble with his answer. It was sensible. It was also painful. Mrs. Marden stepped forward. Your Grace, the Duchess's seal was kept in her writing box after the baker's order. I saw it there yesterday afternoon. Who entered the room afterward? Elwyn asked. Mary Bell brought tea. Thomas carried in the coal ledger. Sir Yardley's clerk, Mr. Pike, came to ask where the second account volume had been laid. Claudine turned. Mr. Pike was in my sitting room. Mrs. Marden's lips pressed together. At the threshold only, Your Grace, as far as I saw. I told him the room was private. Elwyn's expression went utterly still. When? Near 4 o'clock, before the supper. Yes, Your Grace. Claudine remembered the clerk then, a narrow young man with ink stains on his cuffs and eyes that avoided women until he thought they were not looking. Sir Yardley had sent him twice with folded papers. Both times he had bowed as if apology were part of his posture. Then he had opportunity to see my writing box. Perhaps, Elwyn said, but not enough to remove a seal unless no one watched him. I was in the kitchens, Mrs. Marden said, shame entering her voice. There was so much to arrange. Claudine turned at once. Do not take guilt from a thief simply because you were feeding people. The housekeeper blinked hard. Elwyn looked at Claudine then, and something in his face shifted again. That same stunned attention she had seen when the hall toasted her. It made her suddenly aware of the smallness of the room, the late hour, the lamp between them, and the way his hand rested near hers on the ledger. Not touching. Near, she reached for the account volume at the same time he did. Their fingers brushed over the open page, bare skin to bare skin, because she had removed her gloves to handle the papers and he had done the same to avoid smudging ink. The contact was slight. It should have meant nothing. It meant enough that both of them stopped. Claudine felt the warmth of his fingers, the restraint in the way he did not close his hand, did not claim the accident, did not turn it into comfort she had not invited. His eyes lifted to hers. For one breath, the forged receipt, the cold castle, Morwenna's smile, and Sir Yardley's polished contempt all receded behind the startling fact that her husband was close, uncertain, and waiting for her, choice even in so small a thing. Claudine withdrew first, not because she wished him farther away, because wanting him nearer would make suspicion hurt worse. Elwyn let her go immediately. Forgive me, he said. There is nothing to forgive. We reached for the same page, not only for that. She looked up. He did not continue. Perhaps he could not yet. Mrs. Marden moved quietly to the side table, giving them the mercy of occupation. Claudine folded her hands together. The signature is too rounded, she said, forcing the room back into order. I write the C in Claudine with a sharper beginning. And this paper is not from my box. Mine has a watermark near the lower edge. Elwyn examined the sheet. This has none. Cheap paper disguised by confident ink, like many confident men, Mrs. Marden said under her breath, then froze as if she had shocked herself. Claudine almost smiled. Elwyn did. Barely, but enough. Mrs. Marden, he said, tomorrow you will give me the name of every servant, clerk, tradesman, and visitor who came near her Grace's sitting room, quietly. Yes, Your Grace. He opened a small black dispatch box he had brought from London and placed the forged receipt inside. Then he locked it and set the key in his waistcoat pocket. This remains with me until a solicitor examines the hand, paper, ink, and seal impression. Claudine looked at the box, and if Sir Yardley asks where it is, he may ask me. That will protect the paper. It will not protect the story. Elwyn's eyes returned to hers. What story? That I arrived, spent money, fed dependents, bought gratitude, and forged approval when questioned. No one with sense will believe that. Society is not governed by sense. It is governed by repetition. He had no answer ready. That, strangely, pleased her more than a polished assurance would have done. There is an assembly in Allenby next week, Mrs. Marden said reluctantly. Lady Morwenna mentioned it to Mrs. Vale. Many local families will attend. Claudine understood at once. Morwenna would not need proof. She would need a room, a whisper, and the appearance of concern. Sir Yardley would supply the grave face of authority. Then the story has already been invited to dance, Claudine said. Elwyn moved one step closer, stopping before his nearness could become pressure. "I will not allow them to make you stand alone in that room." She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so sharply that she turned the desire into steel. "Do not allow, Your Grace. I was sent here alone, before anyone forged a thing." The words struck him openly. No witness softened them. No rank could answer them. His face lost color beneath its control. "Yes," he said, "you were." Claudine had expected defense. His agreement unsettled her more. She picked up Sir Yardley's latest letter and placed it beside her true order and Elwyn's old note. "Then understand me clearly. I will not be managed like a troublesome room. I will not be locked, aired, opened, or closed, according to which arrangement best suits male pride. If I am accused in public, I will answer in public. If I am protected, it will not be by being hidden." Elwyn bowed his head once, not as duke to subject, but as a man receiving terms he had earned. "Then we find the truth before the assembly, and if we cannot find all of it, we make certain they learn you do not frighten easily." "I frighten very easily," Claudine said. "I merely dislike giving satisfaction." This time his faint smile was sadder. "That may be the bravest definition I have heard." Outside the morning room, wind moved along the old stones. Somewhere below, the kitchen banked the fires for the night. Briarholt was warmer than it had been, but warmth had drawn enemies from the walls. Claudine watched Elwyn lift the locked dispatch box and knew the receipt was safe. Her name was not yet. The Allenby assembly rooms had never held so much warmth and so little mercy. By 7 o'clock, the long windows were white with frost. The lamps had been lit beneath green glass shades, and every local family within driving distance had gathered with the eager restraint of people who claimed they had come for music while waiting for disgrace. Claudine felt it the moment she entered on Elwyn's arm. Not because anyone stared openly. Open cruelty was almost honest, and therefore too coarse for the room. This was worse. Fans paused half a second too long. Ladies leaned close beneath the scrape of violins. Gentlemen who had troubled themselves over Briarholt's empty grates now examined her gown, her gloves, the small iron key at her waist, as though generosity left stains visible to the trained eye. Elwyn's hand rested properly over hers where it lay upon his sleeve. He had not pressed it. He had not tightened his hold when the first whispers rose. He had asked in the carriage, before the lamps of Allenby came into view, whether she still wished to attend. Claudine had answered, "If I stay away, they will call it guilt before supper." He had said only, "Then we go in together, together." The word had followed her through the cold air like the echo of something too fragile to trust. Now, beneath the assembly room chandeliers, she discovered how easily together could be tested. Lady Morwenna Leake stood near the refreshment table in ivory silk, surrounded by Mrs. Harcourt, Lady Bellamy, and two young wives eager to borrow consequence from scandal. Sir Yardley Mompesson waited a few paces behind her, his dark evening coat immaculate, his expression grave enough to pass for reluctance. A magistrate's wife, Mrs. Vale of Allenby Hall, greeted Elwyn with a curtsy so deep it was almost fear, then turned to Claudine with sympathetic sweetness. "Your Grace, how kind of you to come. We have heard such moving reports from Briarholt." "I hope some of them were accurate," Claudine said. Mrs. Vale blinked. "Indeed, one never knows, does one?" Lady Morwenna's voice slipped into the pause. "That is precisely the trouble with reports. They travel before accounts can be examined." The nearby conversation thinned. Elwyn's gaze moved toward Morwenna, but Claudine spoke first. "Then perhaps accounts should learn to travel faster. A small smile touched Morwenna's mouth. How droll, though figures, unlike feeling, resist haste. Only when someone has reason to delay them. Sir Yardley stepped forward with practiced sorrow. Your Grace, I fear this is not the place. For accuracy? Claudine asked. I agree. Accuracy is rarely invited where insinuation has already taken the best chair. The violins continued, but weakly now, as if the bow arms knew a better performance had begun. Elwyn stood very still beside her. Claudine sensed his attention, not restraining her, not rescuing her. Waiting, it steadied and unnerved her at once. Then Lady Bellamy unfolded a paper from her reticule with the dramatic hesitation of a woman who wished everyone to know she did not enjoy drama. Surely this can be resolved simply. Sir Yardley was kind enough to reassure several of us that there is no question of wickedness, only youthful inexperience in household charity. A new Duchess may not realize that buying affection from dependents can look rather unfortunate. The room quieted. There it was, not theft yet, not open accusation. Something silkier, something that made kindness seem vulgar. Claudine felt the phrase move through the assembly like soot. Buying affection. A servant's toast in the great hall became purchase. Warm broth became vanity. Paid wages became performance. The children by the schoolroom fire became evidence against her heart. For one instant, anger rose so sharply that she could not speak. Elwyn moved as if to answer. Claudine took her hand from his arm. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Enough. He stopped. She saw the flicker in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or understanding. Sir Yardley, she said. What supplier is named on the receipt you have been discussing? Sir Yardley's face did not change, but his fingers flexed once against his glove. Your Grace misunderstands. I have discussed no document improperly. Then you may correct the room now. Mrs. Vale looked from one to the other. There is a receipt, Lady Morwenna sighed. It is unkind to force Sir Yardley into this. He has served the Selborne estates faithfully for years. Then he will know the name, Claudine said. Sir Yardley bowed his head as if reluctant virtue had become unbearable. Blue Heart Cole. The name struck strangely. Claudine heard first the word blue, and her hand moved before thought could stop it, touching the faded ribbon tied to the iron key at her waist. Elwyn saw. His eyes followed the gesture. Lady Morwenna saw too, and something bright with satisfaction passed over her face. Blue Heart Coal, Claudine repeated. How much coal did they deliver? The matter is under review. That is not an amount. A murmur stirred. Sir Yardley's voice hardened beneath its polish. 4 tons were charged in her Grace's approved order, and none arrived at Briarholt. So her Grace asserts. Mrs. Vale drew back. Lady Bellamy covered her mouth with her fan. Morwenna's sympathy sharpened into triumph. No one wishes to believe impropriety, she said. Yet the estate cannot be warmed by wishes. If funds were spent and no coal appeared, one must ask where the money went. Servants who are suddenly loyal, tenants who toast a lady's name, children fed in rooms once properly closed. Affection can be terribly expensive. The words landed cleanly. Claudine felt every face adjust around them. Not condemnation. Not yet. Worse, curiosity pretending to be conscience. Elwyn's expression had become unreadable. But she knew him better now than she had 10 days ago. She saw the shadow cross his face when Sir Yardley said 4 tons. She saw memory drag at him, his father's old waste, his mother's cold rooms. Accounts that had once looked generous while comfort vanished. The resemblance was no accident. Someone had shaped the lie to fit his wound. Claudine turned toward him without meaning to. For one small, foolish part of herself, She needed to see refusal there, immediate and complete. Instead, she saw a man struck in the one place fear still governed him. He did not believe Morwenna, not fully. He did not believe Claudine false, not fully, but hesitation entered his eyes, and that was enough to cut. "Your Grace," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "do you need me to answer this alone?" His jaw tightened. No. Yet the word came a breath too late. Publicly, he moved at once. He stepped forward, and when he spoke, the room remembered his rank. No further questioning of the Duchess will take place here. Sir Yardley bowed. "Of course, I never intended distress." "You intended a room." Elwyn's voice was cold. "You have one. Do not mistake it for a tribunal." The assembly held still. It should have been protection. It was protection, and still, Claudine's pride stood wounded beside it, because he had stopped the interrogation before he had cleared her. Morwenna lowered her lashes. How noble, though silence may not satisfy those who care for the estate. Claudine turned back to Sir Yardley. Her voice was steady now. Too steady. One question then, who owns Blue Heart Coal? Sir Yardley's gaze sharpened. A regional supplier. That was not my question. A reputable concern. Names are useful things, Sir Yardley. They prevent concern from becoming fog. A few people shifted. Mrs. Vale looked suddenly less pleased with the entertainment. Sir Yardley smiled, but the edge showed. "I will provide all proper information to His Grace." "How strange," Claudine said. "The coal was supposedly ordered in my hand, approved under my authority, and used tonight to question my character. Yet the owner's name must be reserved for men." Silence fell, not complete. Better. Uneasy. The kind of silence in which a lie felt the floorboards weaken beneath it. Elwyn looked at her then, and admiration broke through the darkness in his face. Too late to prevent the wound, but not too late to see it. The musicians began again at the far end of the room, desperate to restore society to itself. A quadrille was announced. No one moved at first. Then chairs shifted, fans opened, and whispers returned with new life. Claudine inclined her head to Mrs. Vale, to Lady Bellamy, even to Morwenna. "Good evening." Elwyn offered his arm. Claudine looked at it. Every eye seemed to notice the pause. She placed her fingertips upon his sleeve, because to refuse him there would become another story before dawn. But her touch was lighter than before. He felt it. She knew because his breath changed. Outside, in the cold entry where her cloak waited, Elwyn said, "Claudine, not Duchess, not your Grace." Her name, bare and urgent. She fastened her gloves slowly. "You stopped them from questioning me." "I did, but not from doubting me." He flinched as if she had laid the forged receipt between them again. "I saw the pattern my father left behind. For one moment, I saw it before I saw you. That was my failure, not yours." The honesty should have soothed her. It did not enough. For one moment is all society requires. She descended the steps before Audiobook's answer. He reached out, perhaps to steady her on the frosted stone, perhaps to beg one more word. She stepped back with perfect dignity. His hand stopped in the air and lowered. He let her refuse him. That, too, hurt. In the carriage, neither spoke for the first mile. The lantern swung. Frost silvered the black hedges. Claudine sat upright, hands folded over the iron key at her waist. Elwyn watched the window, his reflection carved from regret. Briarholt's lights appeared at last, through the dark, warmer than the room they had left, and more fragile than victory. When the carriage stopped, Claudine did not wait for his assistance. She entered the castle, crossed the hall where the supper tables had been cleared, and went straight to the estate office. Elwyn followed, silent. Mrs. Marden rose from the small desk, alarm in her face. Claudine untied the ring of household keys from her waist. The iron key with the faded blue ribbon lay on top, cold again from the journey. She placed them on Elwyn's desk. The sound was Small's. "Final, Your Grace," Mrs. Marden whispered. Claudine looked at Elwyn, and this time she allowed him to see the hurt without allowing it to bend her. "I will not govern a house under suspicion. I will not hold authority like a favor that may be withdrawn the moment a forged paper resembles an old fear. When Briarholt requires a duchess trusted enough to feed it, you know where to find me." Elwyn's face lost all command. "Where will you go?" "The dower rooms. Mrs. Marden will chaperone what propriety requires. I shall not leave the estate. I shall simply cease pretending power without trust is anything but another locked door." She turned before tears could humiliate her. Behind her, the keys remained on the desk, the blue ribbon lying across the iron like a vein of winter. And for the first time since she had arrived at Briarholt, the castle's warmth did not comfort her at all. The keys remained on Elwyn's desk until morning, and every hour they lay there made the estate office feel less like a room of governance and more like a judgment chamber. He had not touched them after Claudine left. The iron key with the faded blue ribbon rested above the smaller household keys, its old metal dulled by candlelight, its ribbon drawn across the polished wood like a wound that had learned manners. Sir Yardley Mompesson arrived before breakfast with a face arranged into solemn usefulness and a leather portfolio beneath one arm. "Your Grace," he said, glancing once at the keys before pretending not to see them. Her Grace has taken a wise pause. In moments of public uncertainty, it is often better that domestic authority return to experienced hands until the accounts are regularized. Elwyn looked up from the forged receipts' copied particulars. The original remained locked in his black dispatch box, untouched since the night before, because lies loved movement and proof needed custody. "Experienced hands," he repeated. Sir Yardley inclined his head. "I am prepared to resume temporary supervision of household disbursements, relief orders, fuel stores, and internal account access. It will calm the neighborhood." "Will it?" "Naturally. The appearance of improvised charity has already caused confusion. If I may send a circular to the tradesmen, assuring them that no further orders bearing Her Grace's name are to be honored without my countersignature, we may contain the damage." Elwyn's hand flattened on the desk. "No." The word stopped Sir Yardley in place. "Your Grace, no account book leaves this room. No tradesman receives such a circular. No servant is instructed to disregard the Duchess's prior orders. No key is placed in your hand." Sir Yardley's colour changed slowly. "Then who is to manage the house?" "At present, no one who benefits from its confusion." "That is a grave implication." "It is a mild one. You should be grateful for my restraint." For a moment, the polished man beneath the baronet showed through. Not fear exactly. Calculation under pressure. Then the mask returned. "As your Grace wishes. Send Mr. Pike to me, my clerk, immediately." Sir Yardley bowed. "I regret to say Mr. Pike departed before dawn on a family errand." Elwyn went very still. "To where?" "I was not informed." "Your clerk flees the morning after a forged receipt is discovered, and you were not informed?" "Flees is an ungenerous word. It is a temporary one." Sir Yardley made no answer. Elwyn turned the key ring once with the tip of his finger, not taking it, only hearing the faint metal shift. Claudine had placed it there because he had made authority feel conditional. He had heard her words all night. Power without trust is another locked door. It would have been easier if she had wept. A weeping woman could be comforted by men who liked themselves afterward. Claudine had done something harder. She had removed herself from the lie and left him with the shape of his failure. "You may go," Elwyn said, "and Sir Yardley." The baronet paused. "Yes, your grace. If a single account book is missing by noon, I will send for a solicitor from Newcastle and another from London. I will make certain neither owes you dinner, credit, or silence." Sir Yardley bowed without speaking and left. Only then did Elwyn take the keys. The iron one was colder than the room. He closed his hand around it and discovered, absurdly, that he hated how familiar its chill felt. The dower rooms lay in the southeastern wing, a modest suite, once intended for widowed rank and quiet inconvenience. Claudine had chosen them because they were within Briarholt but outside the daily command of its principal rooms. Mrs. Marden had moved a writing table, a coal scuttle, and 2 clean blankets there before dawn, not asking whether such simplicity offended a duchess. Claudine had answered by helping to carry the inkstand herself. When Elwyn arrived, he did not enter. He knocked and waited until Mrs. Marden opened the door. "Will her grace receive me?" he asked. The housekeeper's eyes searched his face with a courage he deserved from no servant, and had somehow earned from this house's suffering. "I will ask, your grace." The door remained open behind her. Propriety stood between him and Claudine like a stern aunt, and for once he was grateful for it. Claudine sat near the window in a dark morning gown, her hands folded over a small notebook. She looked tired, not fragile. That distinction mattered. Weariness had touched her eyes, but her spine remained straight. She had not used the keys as theatre. She had given them back because she meant every word. Mrs. Marden returned. "Her grace will speak with you if I remain." "Of course," Elwyn said. Claudine looked at him when he entered, not coldly. That would have been easier. She looked at him with composure that had locked itself around hurt. He stopped several paces away. "Mr. Pike has fled," he said. "Sir Yardley's clerk," before dawn. "Sir Yardley claims ignorance." How convenient for him. "Yes." Claudine's fingers tightened once over the notebook. "Then the room at Allenby has already served its purpose." The clerk disappears. Sir Yardley looks grave. Lady Morwenna looks wounded on behalf of decency. And I look like a woman who bought bread with stolen money. "Not to me." Her eyes lifted. "Not now." He accepted the blow. "Not now. Not yesterday. But for one moment I allowed an old fear to stand between what I saw and what I knew." She said nothing. He deserved the silence. He looked toward the hearth, where the fire was smaller than it should have been. Because she had refused any comfort that would make the dower rooms seem a sulk disguised as exile. When my father managed Briarholt, every account appeared generous on paper. Coal bought, meat supplied, repairs approved. My mother would not complain. She said servants had enough, tenants had enough, she had enough. Then I came home one winter and found the nursery wing colder than the stable. A week later, she took fever. By spring, she was gone. Claudine's face changed, but she did not interrupt. "I learned to distrust warmth written in ledgers," he said. "I learned too well. Last night, when Sir Yardley named that false supplier, I did not see you first. I saw him, my father. His kind of ruin. I feared repeating it more than I trusted what I had seen in you." The fire cracked softly. Mrs. Marden stood near the door, motionless, but Claudine's eyes held his. "That is an explanation," she said, "not an excuse." "I know." "Do you?" "I am beginning to." He drew the iron key from his pocket and placed it on the small table between them, not pushing it toward her, not reclaiming it. "I have forbidden Sir Yardley from taking any account book, key, or authority. The forged receipt remains locked in my dispatch box. I will send for an independent solicitor, but I do not ask you to resume what you laid down last night. Not until trust has been made real enough to bear weight. Her gaze moved to the key. The faded blue ribbon curled against the wood. Then why bring it? Because it should not be in my desk like a punishment. It should be where you can refuse it, accept it, or leave it untouched. Something shifted in her expression, not forgiveness. Something quieter and more dangerous to him, consideration. You have learned to ask better questions overnight, she said. Pain is an able tutor, not always. Sometimes it only makes men proud of their injuries. He looked at her fully. I have been proud for years. Her lips parted slightly, but no answer came. Outside the window, a carriage rolled across the lower drive, not stopping. Perhaps only a tradesman, perhaps a watcher sent by Lady Morwenna. Briarholt had no true privacy now. Scandal had entered the lanes. Elwyn glanced toward the glass. There is another matter. Morwenna has friends in London. Sir Yardley has accounts here. If Pike is running, he is either frightened or carrying instructions. We should speak with the stable lad who saw him leave. We, Claudine repeated, only if you choose it. She looked at the key again, then at him. I will not return to the great hall like a pardoned child. No, I will not be displayed as proof that the Duke believes his wife. Today. No, and if I ask the questions, you will not answer over me, because your title is louder. I will stand where you can see me, not where they must look at me instead. The words came from somewhere rawer than pride. Claudine heard it. Her hand moved, not to the key, but to the edge of the table, nearer his. He did not move, not until she looked at him and saw that he was waiting. Then, very slowly, he offered his hand palm up across the space between them. No command, no rescue, no claim. Claudine looked at his hand for several breaths. Mrs. Marden turned her face toward the window, granting what privacy a loyal woman could within propriety. At last, Claudine placed her hand in his fingers closed carefully around hers. Warmth moved between them, startling in its simplicity. He did not stroke her hand. He did not lift it to his lips. He only held it as if holding steady mattered more than being forgiven. Claudine let the silence lengthen. 3 breaths, 4, 5. Her hand remained in his, freely given and freely able to leave. I am still angry, she said. I know. I still distrust what fear may make of you. So do I. That answer reached her. He felt it in the smallest softening of her fingers. Then she withdrew, gently by her own choice. He let her go. The absence felt deserved. Very well, she said. We shall speak to the stable lad. After that, I want the nursery wing opened. Elwyn's chest tightened. The nursery wing is not relevant. Sir Yardley mentioned the old nursery account before witnesses. The blue ribbon on the key matches the nursery curtains. Blue Heart Coal bears the same word. If that is coincidence, it is an industrious one. He looked at the key on the table. The locked blue door rose in his memory. His mother's hand on his hair. His father's voice outside the nursery, saying comfort, made people weak. There may be things in that wing you would rather not see, he said. Claudine's stood, not taking the key yet. There are things in every locked room someone would rather a woman not see. That is why I intend to open it. Mrs. Marden's eyes shone with sudden alarm and hope. Elwyn looked at his wife and understood, with a force that humbled him, that Briarholt had not warmed because Claudine had ignored its darkness. It had warmed because she kept walking toward it with a candle in her hand. Then he said, I will not stop you. Claudine picked up the iron key. She did not tie it to her waist. Not yet. She held it between them, the blue ribbon lying across her palm. "No," she said. "You will come with me." The blue-painted door to the nursery wing had swollen in its frame, as if the house had spent years pressing its grief outward, and the wood had absorbed every unspoken word. Claudine stood before it with the iron key in her palm, Elwyn at her right, Mrs. Marden behind them holding a lamp with both hands. The corridor had been swept that morning, yet dust still gathered in the grooves of the old floorboards. No servant came near this part of the house unless ordered. Even the air seemed to wait at a distance. "It may not turn," Elwyn said. His voice was controlled, but Claudine heard the strain beneath it. "It did not turn before because it was not the right key," she said, "or because the lock had not been asked by the right person." Mrs. Marden made the smallest sound, almost a breath, almost a prayer. Claudine looked down at the ribbon tied to the key. In daylight, it was clearly the same faded shade as the strip of curtain visible through the tear in the old nursery cloth. Blue, once bright enough to be cheerful, now dulled by time and closed air. She inserted the key. It resisted. Elwyn's hand moved, then stopped before touching hers. Even now he remembered to ask without words. Claudine turned her head slightly. "You may help with the lock," she said. "Not with my courage." A flicker crossed his face. Pain first, then something like reverence. He placed his hand over hers only enough to steady the old metal, not enough to take the act from her. Together they turned it. The lock gave with a hard, complaining click. Claudine felt the sound pass through Elwyn's body before the door opened. His hand fell away at once. She missed the warmth and told herself she had no time for such foolish observations. The door swung inward. Cold breathed out, but it was not the sharp living cold of weather. It was stale, boxed, human. Mrs. Marden raised the lamp. A narrow corridor appeared beyond, papered in a pattern of faded blue flowers. A child's wooden horse stood against one wall, with one painted eye worn away. Shelves held books whose spines had cracked from neglect. At the far end, curtains hung stiff over tall windows, and beneath them stood a low chair with a folded shawl over the back. Elwyn did not enter. Claudine took one step, then another. "Your Grace," Mrs. Marden whispered, though it was unclear which of them she addressed. Elwyn's answer was scarcely audible. "I have not been here since I was 13. Claudine turned. He stood at the threshold like a boy told not to cross a line drawn by sorrow. His face had gone colorless beneath the composure that had once seemed so complete. "You do not have to come in," she said. No, he drew a breath that did not quite steady him. "I do." He entered. The floor creaked beneath his boot, and the sound seemed to wake the room. Claudine moved to the writing table near the window. A dust cloth had been folded over it with unnatural care, not thrown. Beneath the cloth lay a child's slate, 2 rusted penknives, and a small household inventory book bound in blue calfskin. She did not open it yet. Some objects demanded witnesses before becoming evidence. Elwyn had stopped beside the low chair. His fingers hovered over the shawl without touching it. "My mother sat here in the afternoons," he said. "She would say the light was best in this room. It was not. The windows face north. She said it, because I like to read on that rug." Claudine looked toward the worn hearth rug, faded but still there. No fire had burned in the grate for years. Was she ill long? Long enough that no one could call it sudden. Brief enough that my father could call it fate. He swallowed. The winter before she died, he ordered economies. He said the estate bled money through sentiment. Tenant relief, extra coal, food for the schoolroom, blankets for old pensioners. He said comfort made people idle. Mrs. Marden, lowered her head. Claudine understood then why the housekeeper's caution had always carried grief and fury braided together. "And your mother?" she asked gently. "She signed fewer orders, smiled more, wore shawls indoors, told me not to trouble my father. The servants learned not to complain because complaint punished those below them. Then I came home from school and found frost inside this window." He looked at the glass as if the frost might still be there. "She laughed when I was angry. She said old houses had moods." His voice broke only on the last word, not loudly, not theatrically. It broke like ice too thin to bear a footstep. Claudine moved before pride could instruct her otherwise. She reached out and touched his sleeve, just above the wrist. Not his hand, not comfort too intimate for the truth between them. Signal only. "I am here." Elwyn closed his eyes. When he opened them, they shone in the lamplight, though no tear fell. "May I?" he asked. 2 words, low, uncertain, asking for more than proximity, less than absolution. Claudine's throat tightened. Part of her remembered Allenby, the hesitation in his eyes, the keys left on the desk. Another part saw the 13-year-old boy inside the Duke, standing outside a nursery where warmth had been rationed until love froze around it. She gave a small nod. He stepped closer, no embrace yet, only near enough that her hand on his sleeve no longer felt like reaching across a battlefield. "Mrs." Marden turned away toward the shelves, granting them the dignity of not being watched. "I thought if I never came back," Elwyn said, "the house would remain as it was when I left it, closed, punished, unable to ask anything of me. And then you sent me here." His eyes met hers. The truth struck him because she had not softened it. "Yes. Did you mean to punish me?" "No." His answer came at once. "I meant to keep you away from London's expectations, from Morwenna's malice, from a marriage I did not know how to inhabit. I told myself Briarholt gave you authority and distance. I did not ask whether distance could feel like abandonment. It did. I know. You are learning to say that as if it costs you. It does." Claudine's hand remained on his sleeve for 1 breath longer, then withdrew. He let it go. The little exchange should have been nothing. It was not nothing. It was the beginning of a language neither of them yet trusted. Mrs. Marden cleared her throat softly. "Your Grace, the inventory." Claudine opened the blue calfskin book on the table. The first pages listed nursery linens, books, medicines, coal allotments, and schoolroom provisions in a neat female hand that differed from estate office entries. At the top of one page, a strip of blue ribbon had been pressed flat beneath dried gum. A notation beside it read, "Blue ribbon marks legitimate household keys issued under Her Grace's domestic order." Claudine looked at the key in her own hand. Elwyn saw it too. "My mother used ribbon to distinguish her keys," he said slowly. "My father said it was foolish." "Sir Yardley mentioned the old nursery account," Claudine said. "And Blue Heart coal." Mrs. Marden leaned nearer, her face pale. There was never a Blue Heart coal in her late Grace's time. But there was a Blue Heart charity account for winter fuel. Her Grace named it after the inn sign in Allenby village because tenants knew it. Claudine turned the page. A corner had been cut away from the next leaf, not torn by accident, removed. Behind the table, a draught stirred the old wallpaper. Claudine followed it to the lower panel beneath the window. The seam did not match the others. "Mrs. Marden, has this panel been repaired?" "Not to my knowledge." Elwyn came to her side. This time, he did not reach over her. He waited while she worked the edge with the small penknife from the table. The panel opened an inch, then stuck. Elwyn offered the penknife back when she passed it to him, and together, with careful pressure, they loosened the warped wood. Inside lay dust, a child's broken ribbon hoop, and a folded note browned at the edges. Claudine did not seize it. She looked first at Elwyn, then at Mrs. Marden. "We all see where it was found." "Yes," Mrs. Marden whispered. Claudine unfolded the note. The writing was cramped, older than recent forgery, but readable. Mompesson the elder insists the nursery coal allotment was transferred. Her Grace never signed such reduction. Ask to see the chapel chest before winter closes. The former steward knows more than he will say. Claudine read the words aloud once. The name Mompesson settled in the room like soot. Elwyn's face had become terrible in its stillness. "Sir Yardley's father," he said, "was steward under my father." Mrs. Marden sat down suddenly on the edge of the low chair, then stood again as if sitting there were trespass. "Your mother asked about the chapel chest," Claudine said. "Where is it?" "The muniment chest was moved after her late Grace died," Mrs. Marden answered. "Sir Yardley said old papers had been reorganized. I never knew where." Elwyn looked at the cold hearth, the faded blue curtains, the small chair, and the woman beside him who had forced open the room he had feared for half his life. His composure finally failed, not with noise, but with a silent bend of the head. One hand braced against the mantel. His shoulders shook once, only once. Claudine did not rush to make his grief convenient. She stood near enough that he was not alone, far enough that he was not trapped by comfort. After a moment, he said, barely above a whisper, "She was cold because money was stolen, and I let myself believe grief was the only thief." Claudine answered softly, "Then we shall find the other one." From somewhere below, a door closed. Footsteps hurried, then faded. Mrs. Marden turned toward the corridor. "Someone has gone from the east stair." Elwyn lifted his head. The Duke returned to his face, but not the old coldness. Something warmer and more dangerous had joined it. Purpose. Claudine folded the hidden note and placed it inside the inventory book. She kept the iron key in her other hand. Its ribbon lay across her palm, no longer merely a symbol of abandonment, but a thread leading backward through theft, grief, and locked rooms. "No one touches this book except us," she said. Elwyn looked at her. "Agreed. And no one tells Sir Yardley what we found?" "No. Not until we know where that chest was moved." Elwyn's gaze held hers with a steadiness that did not command, did not doubt, and did not retreat. "Then we begin with the chapel." Claudine closed the nursery book. For the first time, the locked wing did not feel like a tomb. It felt like a witness that had waited years for someone stubborn enough to listen. By dawn, Briarholt had learned to whisper in more than one direction. The footsteps Mrs. Marden heard on the east stair had belonged to no ghost, no maid sent for linen, and no wandering child from the schoolroom. Thomas Rook found a lamp still warm on the lower landing, and a smear of mud near the outer service door, fresh enough to shine in the grey light. By breakfast, word came from the stable yard that a boy had seen Sir Yardley's clerk, Mr. Pike, speaking with a groom near the old chapel path 2 nights before, though Mr. Pike was supposed to have fled toward London days earlier. Claudine received the news in the morning room, with the blue calfskin nursery inventory open before her, the hidden note resting beneath its cover, and the iron key placed beside her cup, untouched. Elwyn stood near the mantel, one hand braced there, not from weakness, but from the kind of control that feared what it might do if released too quickly. Mrs. Marden had gone to question the linen maid about who had used the east stair, leaving husband and wife with the first privacy they had been allowed since the locked wing had surrendered its witness. Privacy did not soften the room, it clarified it. Sir Yardley and Lady Morwenna will not wait, Claudine said. If they know we have opened the nursery, they will strike before we understand the chest. They already have. Elwyn held out a folded visiting card without crossing the room. Claudine took it by the edge. Lady Morwenna's writing moved across the back in elegant slashes. Several families remain concerned for the estate's dignity. A winter assembly at Briarholt itself may reassure them, if her Grace's accounts can bear candles. Claudine read it once, then set it down. How kind. She wishes to hang me in my own hall. Our hall. The correction came quietly. She looked up. He did not retreat from the word. Not yet, she said. Not while I live in the dower rooms, and the keys sit between us like a witness no one has sworn. Elwyn closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, all the command had gone out of his face, leaving something more difficult to meet. Then let me speak before we plan another defense. If this is another assurance that you believe me now, I have heard it. It is not. He came no closer until she gave the smallest nod. Even then, he stopped with the table between them. I sent you here alone. I told myself I was giving you authority, distance from London, protection from a marriage I did not know how to enter. That was cowardice dressed as consideration. You arrived to cold rooms, unpaid servants, locked doors, and a steward who believed my absence made him master. I did that. Claudine's fingers closed around the edge of the table. Sir Yardley withheld the coal, and I left him the power to do it. I left you to discover the cost of my grief. The words did not come easily. She saw each one drawn from him like a splinter removed too late. At Allenby, I saw the shape of my father's accounts, and let that old terror stand between me and your truth. For that moment I allowed their lie to breathe. When you placed the keys on my desk, I understood you were not refusing duty. You were refusing to perform trust for a man who had not given it. The fire had burned low, but Claudine felt suddenly warm, then cold, then terribly exposed. She had wanted him to understand. Understanding, when it came this plainly, hurt almost as much as the failure. Do you think apology restores authority? She asked. No. Do you think remorse makes the dower rooms unnecessary? No. Then what are you asking? Elwyn looked at the iron key. Not forgiveness as reward, not return as proof. I am asking to stand where I should have stood from the first. Beside you, behind you when you need space. Silent when your voice must carry. Answerable when my name has made your injury possible. Claudine looked away because the steadiness of him threatened tears more than cruelty ever had. Outside, a cart moved over the yard stones. Somewhere below stairs, Nell's young voice carried, then hushed. Life continued in the house, as if the morning did not hinge on one woman choosing whether to trust the man who had wounded her by fear rather than malice. You said once that you had forgotten how to live in your own house, she said. Yes, and if I help you remember, will you make gratitude look like love? His face changed. The question had struck deep. No, gratitude is what I owe you if you walk away. Love is not a debt I can pay by staying. The word love trembled between them, not declared, not claimed, but awakened enough to make silence dangerous. Elwyn heard it too. He lowered his gaze first, not from shame but restraint. I will not ask for words I have not earned, he said, nor offer them before I can protect them with conduct. Claudine stood then. She did not think before moving. Thought would have made her proud. Pride would have made her still. She crossed the space between them and placed both hands lightly against the front of his coat, not as a lover rushing into safety, not as a wife surrendering anger, but as a woman choosing one moment of human truth inside a house full of locked ones. Elwyn did not touch her until she lifted her face. "May I hold you?" he asked, the question rough with effort. "For a moment," she said, "not instead of answers. Never instead of answers." His arms came around her carefully, as if he feared making a cage of what she had offered freely. Claudine let herself lean into him, only slightly at first, then enough to feel the hard breath leave his chest. He held her as a man holds something entrusted, not possessed. She heard his heartbeat, too fast beneath all that ducal control, and the sound unsettled her with its mortal honesty. He was not forgiven. She was not unhurt, but for several breaths they stood together in the morning room while Briarholt's old walls kept their silence around them. Claudine was the one who drew back. Elwyn released her at once. His hands fell to his sides, empty and disciplined. "Thank you," he said. She almost smiled at the humility of it. "Do not thank me yet. I still intend to be difficult. I am relying on it." Mrs. Marden knocked before entering, her face pale with urgency. "Your Graces." I remembered something. The old muniment chest was not sent to the estate office after her late Grace died. Sir Yardley said the papers were damp and had to be removed from the nursery wing. But 2 footmen carried the chest toward the chapel, not the west rooms. I saw them from the linen stair. Later, the chapel floor near the south wall was boarded over for repairs. Claudine turned to Elwyn. The embrace vanished from the air, replaced by purpose, but something of its warmth remained inside her like a banked coal. "The chapel," she said. "Yes," Elwyn answered, "and if the chest is still there, Sir Yardley will know we are near it." Mrs. Marden hesitated. "There is more. Lady Morwenna's maid told Mary Bell that invitations are already being written for a winter assembly here. Not proposed. Written. Lady Morwenna says all uncertainty should be settled before witnesses." Claudine looked toward the window. Beyond it, Briarholt's chimneys smoked steadily into the pale morning, announcing life to anyone who wished to punish it. "Then we shall oblige her," she said, "but not with uncertainty." Elwyn crossed to the desk and unlocked the black dispatch box. The forged receipt remained inside, flat and guarded. Beside it, he placed a list of missing coal deliveries, the copied account irregularities, and a sealed note summoning an independent solicitor from Newcastle. Claudine watched him write another instruction beneath it in his own hand. "Her Grace will lead the inquiry. All witnesses will answer her questions first." He signed it E. Selborne, Highclere, then sanded the ink and turned the page toward her. "Is that clear enough?" he asked. Claudine read it twice. "For paper, yes. For the man," she met his eyes. "We shall see." This time, when she took the iron key from the table, she tied it again at her waist, not as surrender, not as restored trust, as a choice under review. Elwyn saw the distinction and bowed his head to it. Mrs. Marden lifted the lamp. Outside the morning room, the corridor stretched toward the chapel, toward hidden papers, toward the public trap being built in their own hall. Claudine stepped into it first. Elwyn followed at her side, near enough to be felt, careful enough not to lead. The chapel had been repaired so often by men who feared old paper that its newest boards looked more guilty than its broken stones. Claudine saw it the moment Mrs. Marden lifted the lamp toward the south wall. The rest of the small family chapel bore honest age. The flagstones near the aisle were worn by generations of Selborne feet. The oak pews had darkened with beeswax and hands. The memorial tablets held names in patient marble, but beside the south wall, beneath a narrow stained glass window showing St. Anne with a book in her lap, A square of floor had been boarded with pine too smooth for the surrounding gloom. No carpet covered it. No kneeler stood upon it. It had not been repaired to be useful. It had been repaired to be overlooked. "There," Mrs. Marden whispered. Claudine tightened her fingers around the iron key at her waist. The faded blue ribbon brushed her skirt as though answering the faint color in the stained glass. Elwyn stood beside her, not ahead of her, though she could feel the force it cost him. Mr. Vale, the independent solicitor from Newcastle, knelt carefully near the boards and adjusted his spectacles. He was a square, sober man with damp cuffs from travel and the gratifying habit of asking to see documents before believing titles. "These boards were lifted once before," he said. "Badly done, then put back in haste." "Can you open it without damaging what may be beneath?" Claudine asked. "With care, Your Grace." Elwyn looked at the chapel door. Thomas Rooke had been stationed beyond it, not to bar anyone by force, but to warn them if guests came early. Lady Morwenna's winter assembly was not until evening, yet her invitations had done their work. Carriages had begun to arrive before noon under the excuse of poor roads and an early start. Sir Yardley was already in the house. That knowledge pressed against the chapel walls. There was very little time left for truth to stop being private. Mr. Vale worked with a narrow pry-bar, slow and exact. Each creak of wood sounded too loud. Mrs. Marden held the lamp steady, though her knuckles whitened around the handle. Claudine kept her eyes on the boards because, if she looked at Elwyn, she would remember the embrace in the morning room and the way grief had briefly made him human enough to trust. This was not the hour for tenderness. Not yet. The first board lifted. Beneath it lay dust, old mortar, and a strip of oilcloth folded over an iron-bound chest no wider than a tea-table. Its lock was black with age. Elwyn drew a breath. "The muniment chest," Mrs. Marden said, and her voice broke on the name as if the object had once belonged to a living person. Mr. Vale brushed dust from the lid. No seal visible. Lock intact. Claudine untied the iron key from her waist. "Then let us see whether the key His Grace gave me was meant to abandon me or arm me." Elwyn turned toward her. "Claudine." His voice carried warning and pain together. "If this opens it, then my mother's papers were hidden by men who knew exactly what they were stealing." "Yes." "And if it does not? Then we keep looking." She placed the key in the lock. For a second, nothing moved. The iron resisted, ancient and stubborn. Elwyn's hand hovered near hers, as it had at the nursery door. This time, she did not wait for the silent question to gather too much weight. "Steady it with me," she said. He did. His fingers closed over the key's bow, touching the metal rather than her hand, careful even in urgency. Together, they turned. The lock gave. The sound was small, final, and more damning than any accusation shouted in a public room. Mr. Vale opened the lid. Inside lay papers wrapped in blue cloth, not rotted, not forgotten by accident, preserved. Claudine saw household receipts tied in bundles, wage authorizations, winter fuel orders marked Blue Heart Relief, and a ledger in the late Duchess's hand. Beneath them was another ring of keys, smaller, newer, and tied with a dark thread, a duplicate set. Mrs. Marden covered her mouth. Elwyn did not move at all. Claudine lifted the first bundle and read the top sheet. Coal ordered for Briarholt tenants and household. Paid from the late Duchess's private allowance. She turned another. Received by Mompesson and Son, acting estate stewards. Mr. Vale leaned closer. "Mompesson and Son, Sir Yardley's father," Elwyn said. His voice had gone low enough to frighten the air. Claudine unfolded a newer-looking receipt tucked beneath the old ones. The name Blue Heart Coal appeared in a hand too similar to recent entries. "This is not from your mother's time," she said. "No," Mr. Vale said. "This paper is recent. Within the year, I should say. He lifted it with a cloth, and the supplier is false. There is no stamp, no merchant address, no haulier mark." Claudine's heart struck hard once. Then the old charity account became the mask for the new theft. Elwyn looked at the duplicate keys. "And someone used the memory of my mother's kindness to starve this house again." Before anyone could answer, footsteps sounded beyond the chapel door. Thomas's voice came, strained with politeness. "My lady, His Grace gave orders." Lady Morwenna's laugh floated through the wood. "How charming! His Grace has given many orders lately. They rarely last." The door opened before Elwyn reached it. Morwenna entered in pearl-coloured silk, Sir Yardley behind her, followed by Mrs. Vale of Allenby Hall, Lady Bellamy, and two gentlemen whose curiosity had clearly overcome their manners. Morwenna took in the lifted boards, the open chest, the papers, and Claudine kneeling beside them with the iron key in her hand. Her expression changed, but only for a heartbeat. Then sympathy arranged itself over her face like a veil. "Oh dear, are we manufacturing evidence before supper?" Mr. Vale rose immediately. "Madam, I am a solicitor retained independently by His Grace." "How fortunate," Morwenna said. "A solicitor can make almost anything sound less desperate." Sir Yardley stepped forward too quickly. "This chest contains old estate papers. They are not properly sorted. I must insist they be returned to the office before misinterpretation causes harm." Claudine stood with one paper in her hand. "You insist?" "For the estate's protection." Elwyn moved then, not in front of Claudine. Beside her, one pace closer to Sir Yardley than she was, a barrier only if needed. "You will not touch that chest." Sir Yardley bowed toward him but watched Claudine. "Your Grace, old grief can distort judgment. Her Grace has already shown a disposition to attach sentiment to household matters." Claudine looked at the paper in her hand. Then she looked at Mrs. Vale and Lady Bellamy, whose faces had grown uncertain. "This is not sentiment. This is a receipt from the late Duchess's Blue Heart Relief account, signed by Mompesson and Son. This second receipt bears the same account name, copied recently, with no merchant mark and no delivered coal. Sir Yardley used an old charitable name to create a false modern supplier." Sir Yardley's face hardened. "That is an outrageous accusation from a lady already under question." "Then answer it before witnesses," Claudine said. "Where is Blue Heart Coal located?" His silence was brief, too brief to save him, long enough to expose him. Morwenna stepped in smoothly. "Surely the evening assemblies is the proper place for all questions, not a chapel floor with papers dragged from dust and a new Duchess eager to clear herself." Elwyn's voice cut through her silk. "Her Grace has no need to clear herself before you." "No?" Morwenna turned her eyes toward him, wounded and bright. "Then why is everyone here on their knees?" Claudine felt Elwyn's anger gather. She touched his sleeve once. A reminder. "Not before me, beside me." He looked at her, received it, and stepped back by half a pace. That obedience to her chosen place gave Claudine more strength than any public declaration could have done. "Because truth is often kept low," she said, "under floors, behind locks, beneath the dignity of those who profit from not bending." Mrs. Vale's fan lowered. Mr. Vale sorted the papers with professional speed. "I will take custody of these documents, with both your Graces as witnesses, and make a formal list before evening." "You will do no such thing," Sir Yardley snapped. It was the first unvarnished fear he had shown. The chapel heard it. So did the witnesses. Claudine held up the duplicate key ring. "And these?" Sir Yardley stared. Morwenna's mouth parted, then closed. "Found in the muniment chest," Claudine said. "A second set to locked account materials. Not mine. Not his Grace's." Elwyn's eyes held Sir Yardley with terrible stillness. "You should spend the next hours considering whether silence or confession will cost you less." Sir Yardley recovered enough to bow, but not enough to hide the tremor near his jaw. "We shall see what the room believes tonight." "Yes," Claudine said, "we shall." Morwenna retreated first, drawing the others with her under the pretense of shock. When the chapel door closed, the quiet they left behind was not peace. It was the pause before a storm chose its direction. Mr. Vale began listing papers. Mrs. Marden knelt to fold the blue cloth with reverent hands. Elwyn turned to Claudine. The anger in him had not vanished, but something else stood behind it. Relief, fear, pride, need. "You steadied me," he said softly. "I reminded you. No, you trusted me to remember." She looked down at the key, still in her hand. "Do not make it sound nobler than it was. I merely did not want you to ruin my best line by becoming ducal thunder." A startled laugh escaped him, quiet and broken by feeling. It changed his face. In that moment, the chapel seemed less cold than it had any right to be. He stepped closer, then stopped. The restraint was clear now, not distance, but respect struggling with longing. "Claudine," he said, and her name sounded different in the chapel, stripped of title and defense. "May I kiss you?" The question entered the air with such care that it did not frighten her. It steadied her. She thought of London, of the cold key, of Allenby, of the dower rooms, of his apology, of his hand offered palm up, of the way he had stepped back when she touched his sleeve. The kiss was not proof. It was not payment. It was a choice standing after truth had begun to breathe. Claudine stepped closer. "Yes," she said, "but don't make me regret trusting you with even that." His eyes softened with something almost like pain. "I won't." He bent his head slowly enough that she could still refuse. She did not. His lips touched hers with quiet reverence, brief and warm and utterly unlike possession. Claudine's free hand rose to his sleeve, not to push him away, but to answer. When the kiss ended, he did not draw her closer. He rested his forehead near hers for one breath, then stepped back because they were not alone, and because respect had become part of how he loved her before either of them had dared say the word. "I am dangerously near loving you," he said, voice rough. Claudine's heart moved like a candle in a draught. She should have retreated into caution. Instead, she held his gaze. "Then don't retreat this time." Beyond the chapel door, the first guests for the winter assembly were gathering in the hall. Sir Yardley believed he still controlled the public narrative. Lady Morwenna believed beauty could polish fear into innocence. Claudine looked at the open chest, the blue cloth, the documents, and the key that had unlocked more than iron. "Mr. Vale," she said, her voice steady again. "List quickly tonight. Briarholt hears its own accounts aloud." By the time the last candle was lit in Briarholt's great hall, the room had become what Lady Morwenna had intended, and what Claudine had quietly remade. It was a stage. The difference lay in who would be forced to perform. Carriages stood in the dark sweep of the drive, their lamps glowing through mist, while servants moved between the entrance hall and supper tables with a discipline that no longer looked frightened. Local gentry had arrived early under the excuse of bad roads. Tenants had gathered at the lower end by Elwyn's express invitation, not as ornaments of benevolence, but as witnesses to what had been done in their name. Mrs. Marden stood near the sideboard, pale and upright. Thomas Rook watched the doors. Mr. Vale, the solicitor from Newcastle, had placed the listed documents in a locked leather case upon a small table beside the hearth. The iron key with the faded blue ribbon rested in Claudine's palm, not at her waist now. She held it because the room needed to see what had opened the truth. Elwyn stood beside her, not before her, not behind her. The warmth of his hand was near hers, offered but not claiming. She felt the memory of the chapel kiss like a banked flame, private and steady beneath the public cold about to break. Across the hall, Lady Morwenna stood in pearl silk beneath the Selborne portraits, beautiful enough to make innocence look fashionable. Sir Yardley Mompesson occupied the exact centre of a small cluster of gentlemen, grave, wounded, almost paternal in his disappointment. He waited until the music had ceased, until every eye had found the Duke and Duchess, and then he bowed toward Elwyn with an expression of reluctance so polished that lesser rooms might have believed it. "Your Grace," he said, carrying his voice just far enough, "I beg pardon for intruding upon an evening meant to reassure the county. Yet reassurance cannot rest upon concealed disorder. Before this hall celebrates new warmth, it must know who paid for it." A murmur stirred at once. Claudine did not move. Elwyn's fingers flexed, but he did not speak over her. Sir Yardley turned slightly, letting the room share his sorrow. A forged-looking order, irregular relief expenses, coal, charged under her Grace's approval, and never delivered. I have served House Selborne too long to permit scandal to grow in silence. "How noble," Claudine said. Her voice was not loud, but the room had been waiting for it. "You must have suffered greatly while arranging it." Sir Yardley's mask tightened. Morwenna stepped forward with a faint gasp. "Your Grace, no one here wishes to accuse you personally. We know how easily a new bride, eager to be loved in a cold house, might be misled by servants, tradesmen, even by her own generous impulses." Claudine looked at her. "You have practiced compassion until it sounds like a knife." The room stilled. Elwyn's hand opened beside hers. This time, before she began, Claudine placed her hand in his, not because she needed rescue, because she chose partnership where everyone could see it. His fingers closed around hers with measured care, and he did not let go until her own hand settled firmly in his. The act passed through the hall faster than any whisper. Sir Yardley saw it. Morwenna saw it. So did every servant who had watched Claudine leave the keys on the desk rather than wear authority without trust. "Mr. Vale," Claudine said, "the first document, if you please." The solicitor opened the case. "The first is the forged receipt discovered after the household supper. It names Blue Heart Coal as supplier and bears an imitation of her Grace's signature." He lifted the paper for the witnesses closest to see. "The paper carries no proper merchant mark. The ink and paper do not match the date claimed. The hand imitates her Grace's, but not consistently." Claudine turned to Sir Yardley. "Where is Blue Heart Coal located?" He smiled faintly. "As I said at Allenby, regional suppliers often work through agents." "Names, Sir Yardley. You have always disliked them at inconvenient moments." Mr. Vale produced the second bundle. These papers were recovered today from an iron-bound muniment chest beneath the chapel floor, opened by her Grace's key before witnesses. They contain records of a former Blue Heart relief account established by the late Duchess of Highclere for winter fuel, wages, and tenant support. Mrs. Vale of Allenby Hall lowered her fan. A tenant near the lower table crossed himself softly, then remembered where he was and froze. Claudine held up the key. The ribbon trembled slightly, though her voice did not. The blue ribbon marked legitimate household keys under the late Duchess's domestic authority. That record was found in the nursery inventory. The modern false supplier copied an old charitable name, not a real coal company. Sir Yardley's face reddened. Old papers prove nothing about present management. Then let us discuss present papers, Claudine said. Mr. Vale placed another sheet on the table, the recent Blue Heart coal receipts. Match payments routed through an account connected to Mompesson and Son, formerly estate stewards and advisors. A duplicate key ring to locked account materials was found in the same chest. The key wards match the office cabinet and the old muniment lock. A hard silence followed. Elwyn spoke then, not to overpower Claudine, but to bear what belonged to him. I was absent from Briarholt. I trusted men who had inherited old access because I did not wish to enter old rooms. That failure is mine. But no man in this room will place the cost of my failure upon my wife. Sir Yardley snapped. Your Grace, grief has made you susceptible to manipulation. Elwyn's hand tightened around Claudine's, not painfully, only enough that she felt the truth of him before he released another piece of pride. Grief made me absent. Fear made me hesitate at Allenby. Cowardice made me call abandonment protection. Her Grace did not manipulate me. She did what I lacked the courage to do. She opened the house and counted what had been stolen. Claudine turned toward him despite the room. The words struck deeper than public defense. He had named the harp. He had not hidden behind title. Morwenna moved quickly, as if sensing the hall shift beyond her control. This is touching, Elwyn, but surely you cannot mean to place ducal judgment beneath a woman's housekeeping discoveries. Do not call me Elwyn in my wife's hall, he said. The correction cut clean. A murmur moved through the guests, no longer amused. Claudine looked at Morwenna. There remains your letter. Morwenna's face went very still. My letter, Mr. Vale unfolded a small sheet. The paper cream, the hand elegant and unmistakable. Recovered with Sir Yardley's private notes, it reads, If Briarholt is starved of comfort long enough, any warmth she brings will look extravagant. Let the county learn to ask what affection costs. Lady Morwenna's lips parted. That is taken out of context. What context improves starvation? Claudine asked. No one answered. Sir Yardley turned on Morwenna. You said the Duke would tire of her before accounts were examined. Morwenna's eyes flashed. And you said no one would find the chest. The room inhaled as one body. There it was, not a confession signed in legal ink, but truth startled into speech before witnesses. Mr. Vale immediately made a note. Elwyn looked at Thomas. Sir Yardley will leave Briarholt tonight under supervision. His access to every Selborne account is revoked. Mr. Vale will deliver the documents to my London solicitor and begin proceedings for recovery of stolen funds. No servant, tenant, or tradesman is to obey an order bearing Sir Yardley's hand. Lady Morwenna Leake is no longer received at Briarholt, Selborne House, or any house under my patronage. Morwenna whitened. You cannot unmake me socially over a misunderstanding. Claudine's answer was quiet. No. You unmade yourself when you believed a cold house was easier to defend than a warm woman. Mrs. Marden gave a little sound, not quite a sob. Near the lower tables, old Mrs. Vale, the widow, pressed both hands to her mouth. Sir Yardley was escorted out first, protesting in fragments that diminished with every step. Morwenna followed with her head high, but the room did not part for her with the old admiration. It opened carefully, as one opens space around something broken and sharp. When the doors closed, no one applauded. Claudine was grateful. Applause would have made pain decorative. Instead, The hall remained silent until Elwyn turned toward the tenants, servants, local families, and London guests gathered beneath the restored lights. His hand was still in Claudine's. He lifted it, not as display, but as witness. When Her Grace arrived, this house had my name and very little of my honor. She did not give Briarholt charity. She gave it conscience. I did not give her a home. She taught me what home meant. Claudine's breath caught. He looked down at her then, and the room blurred at its edges. I love you, Claudine, not because you saved Briarholt, but because you made me brave enough to live in it. The words did not land like scandal. They landed like warmth entering stone. Claudine felt the whole hall watching, yet his hand made a private place between them. She could have answered with a smile and let society call it enough. She did not. And I love you, Elwyn, she said, her voice clear enough to carry, freely or not at all, and it is freely. His eyes changed, not with triumph. With relief so deep it humbled him before everyone. The first sound came from Mrs. Marden, a breath released after years. Then the hall stirred, not into cheering, but into something steadier. People bowed their heads. Servants stood taller. Tenants looked at the fires as if they had been given permission to trust heat again. Elwyn bent slightly toward Claudine, still mindful of every witness and every promise. Will you walk with me through the house? He asked. Not ahead. Never ahead, unless you ask me to open a stubborn door. She almost laughed, and that nearly undid her. Then yes. They walked from the great hall together, while behind them Mr. Vale secured the papers. Mrs. Marden ordered hot supper served at last, and Briarholt held its warmth without apology. In the corridor beyond the hall, Elwyn paused beneath the portrait of his mother. The blue ribbon in the painted hand caught candlelight. Claudine held up the old iron key, its faded ribbon resting across her palm. Elwyn covered her hand with his only after she turned it toward him. The house is yours, he said. No, Claudine answered, leaning close enough that only he could hear. The house is ours, if we keep telling it the truth. 6 weeks after the winter assembly, Briarholt no longer apologized for being alive. Smoke rose each morning from chimneys that had once stood cold against the Northumberland sky, and the sound of work moved through the old corridors with a confidence more persuasive than grandeur. In the kitchen, Mary Bell scolded Nell Price for burning a tray of oatcakes, then hid the worst of them beneath a napkin because the little scullery maid was still learning not to flinch at mistakes. In the schoolroom, 3 tenant children had become 7, and the cracked slate Claudine had first found beneath dust now hung by the hearth with sums written across it in a child's careful hand. The chapel door opened without complaint. The nursery wing had been aired, cleaned, and left partly unchanged, not as a tomb, but as a room where grief could sit without ruling the house. On the writing table there, beneath fresh paperweights and beside the blue calfskin inventory, rested a folded copy of the late Duchess's Blue Heart relief accounts, now properly transcribed, witnessed by Mr. Vale, and entered into the estate records, where no steward could bury them again. Sir Yardley Mompesson had not returned to Briarholt. His letters, when they came through solicitors, had grown shorter, then frightened, then silent. Funds routed through false suppliers had been traced. Several debts attached to his name had become public in exactly the drawing rooms that once admired his prudence, and the Selborne solicitors had begun proceedings for restitution with a steadiness that did not require spectacle. Mr. Pike, found in Durham under an aunt's roof and a borrowed name, had given a statement after learning Sir Yardley had intended to place the forgery upon him alone. Lady Morwenna Leake had departed for Bath with a companion, a headache, and very few invitations forwarded after her. No one announced her ruin. Society rarely enjoyed admitting it had been fooled. It simply stopped making room. Claudine learned these things in measured reports, signed and sealed, and felt no need to gloat over them. Vindication was not always sweet. Sometimes it was a door quietly closing on those who had tried to lock others inside. That morning, she stood in the restored morning room with an account book open before her, a cup of tea cooling near her elbow, and Mrs. Marden at the side table listing blankets for the widows before the first hard snow. 12 wool blankets for Allenby, Mrs. Marden said, 4 for the South cottagers, 2 for old Mr. Prentice, though he insists one is enough because he has survived worse. Men who boast of surviving cold are often the very men who need blankets most, Claudine said. Send 3, Mrs. Marden's mouth twitched. Yes, Your Grace. The title no longer startled Claudine. It did not sit upon her like borrowed jewelry now. It fit because she had filled it with work, yet she still thought, sometimes, of the woman who had arrived at Briarholt with the iron key biting into her palm and no fire burning in the hall. She did not pity that woman. She honored her. Without her wounded pride, none of this warmth would have been counted as necessary. A step sounded in the corridor. Mrs. Marden looked toward the door and, with the dignity of a housekeeper who knew exactly when not to be present, gathered the blanket list. I shall speak with Mary about the oatcakes, Your Grace. Were they very bad? They were brave, Your Grace, but not successful. Claudine laughed softly, and Mrs. Marden left with that small victory tucked into the room behind her. Elwyn entered a moment later without ceremony, though never without asking the room's permission in some unspoken way. He had changed most where others might not notice. He still wore black more often than not. He still spoke with ducal precision when business required it, but he no longer moved through Briarholt as a man trespassing inside his own inheritance. He paused by the door because she was writing, and waited until she looked up. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Yes," Claudine said, "but I'm finding that I do not always mind." His eyes warmed. "A dangerous concession. Do not grow vain." I said not always. He crossed the room and set a small object on the desk between them. The iron key, the old one. The faded blue ribbon had been removed, not discarded. Claudine had placed it herself inside a narrow drawer, with the late Duchess's copied notes, preserved flat between sheets of paper. Around the key now lay a new ribbon of the same blue, plain, strong, and deliberately visible. Elwyn did not push it toward her. He had learned not to offer symbols like commands. Instead, he picked it up and held it in his bare hand until the old iron lost its chill. Claudine watched, her throat tightening before she understood why. "You have warmed it," she said. "It seemed rude not to, after all it has done for us." Keys do become proud when praised. This one had reason to complain. He came around the desk slowly. "So did you." There was no flattery in the words, only memory, accountability, and a tenderness that had learned patience. He held out the key. "I gave this to you once, as a coward gives distance and calls it safety. I would like to give it again, if you will have it, as a husband who knows that home is not his to bestow upon you. It is ours to keep honest." Claudine rose. She did not take the key at once, "And if I refuse, then I shall put it wherever you tell me and ask what key you prefer. What if I ask for all of them?" His mouth curved. "Then Mrs. Marden will celebrate, Sir Yardley's ghost will faint, and I shall order a stronger ring." The laugh that rose in her was quiet, but it loosened something beneath her ribs. She held out her palm. Elwyn placed the key there, warm from his hand. His fingers did not close over hers until she turned her hand slightly, inviting it. Then he folded both of his around hers and the key together. "I love you still," he said. The words had been spoken publicly once, before witnesses and scandal. Here, in the morning room, they seemed deeper because they had no audience to convince. Claudine looked at their joined hands. "And I am still here." He bent his head and kissed her knuckles, not as a courtly performance, but as if the mark the key had once left on her palm deserved remembrance. Then he kissed her brow, gentle and lingering, asking without words whether nearness remained welcome. Claudine answered by rising onto her toes and kissing him softly on the mouth. It was brief, warm, and chosen. When she drew back, his eyes held the same wonder that had first appeared when he saw the schoolroom fire. But now there was no fear hidden beneath it. "I have been thinking," she said. "That often alters estates, only neglected ones. The Blue Heart account should continue, not as charity tossed downward, as household duty properly recorded. Fuel, blankets, schoolroom bread, fair wages, repairs before winter, and no supplier paid without 2 signatures. Yours and mine, mine and the housekeeper's for domestic relief, yours where law requires it." He bowed his head solemnly. "A wise government. Do not mock me, Your Grace. I wouldn't dare, Your Grace." She gave him the look he deserved. He smiled without shame. Beyond the window, children crossed the courtyard toward the schoolroom, their boots leaving dark marks in the thin morning frost. Thomas Rook carried a basket of coal past them, then stopped to let old Mrs. Vale take his arm over a patch of ice. From the kitchen came the smell of tea, bread, and something that might have been oatcakes redeemed by butter. Briarholt was not perfect. No true home was. There were accounts still to correct, rooms still to mend, winters still to endure, and memories that would never become painless. But the house no longer confused silence with dignity or cold with discipline. Elwyn placed the iron key beside the 2 cups of tea on Claudine's desk. The new blue ribbon caught the morning light. In the drawer beneath it, the old faded ribbon remained preserved, not hidden and not worshipped, a witness to what had been survived. Claudine took Elwyn's hand freely as they stood side by side before the window. The fires below burned steadily. The hall was warm, and at last the castle did not feel empty enough to echo. It felt full enough to answer. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.